I I don't want this series to end now. It's Romania Black. I've only got 2 weeks left of Scum Villain self-saving system, and I am holding off until the last minute when I can possibly record, but I do need to record, and here's my dilemma. I'm like, I want to savor these last 2 weeks because it feels so anticlimactic in a way that we're just getting ready to end in 2 weeks. It doesn't feel like it, but because we're on these extras. But at the same time, I have been so desperate to read chapters 97 and 98 of Scum Villain. After reading chapter 96, I was like, how dare you, MXTX, leave in the middle of a scene? How dare you? And I've been wanting to read chapters 97, 98 so badly, but I've held myself back as long as I could, and today is just, nope, it's not gonna, it's gotta happen. I've got to watch, so that's where I'm at this point, and there's nothing I can do about it. I was like, damn it! So that's where I'm at. So yeah, we're on chapters 97 and 98. Next week will be the last week when we look at chapters 99, chapters 100. Reiki has already sent me like the remaining interview from MXTX to talk about the Scum Villain. I've done the interview. I've looked at the major interview for Heaven Official's Blessing and Modao Zushi, and now I have the Scum Villain questions to get to finally. And we have all of these little extra goodies that have been tucked away in here that I've not got a chance to look at yet that we'll get to do. So next week will be a full course, if you will. But oh my God, these chapters the last 2 weeks have been some of my favorite in the entire series, and I've loved them to pieces. And I'm like, are you kidding? Now we're at the end now? But I've got some comments that I want to talk about, and then we'll go further from that. I do have a bone to pick with MXTX though. Since we're talking about the comments, I do have a bone to pick, because I was like, what? Because the moderator, Be Happy, told me that around the time of chapters 80 and 81, around the time that volume 3 was ending, she said there had been some comments that were kind of spoilery that she didn't want to let me know the information about, because there was some more information that I would see in volume 4. And I was like, okay. They didn't tell me that at the time. This is just what they said after the fact. And so then this last couple of weeks, which is around the time that chapters 89 and 90 have come out, and chapters 90 and 91, or 91 and 92, there was all of these comments, so many of them, of people being like, here's stuff you missed. And I was kind of concerned, because I was like, is this going to get brought up again? And if so, I don't want to know until the very end of the story. And Be Happy's like, no, I don't think you're going to find out. So Rachel8089 says, I think someone already pointed out in another video, which was spoiler tagged. And so it was pointed out, but I didn't read it because the mods flagged it. But Liu Mingyan is heavily implied to be the author of Regret of Chunshan. What? What? Liu Mingyan? Liu Qinghe's sister is the writer of Regret of Chunshan, the heavily explicit smut between Lo Binghe and Shin Qingqiu? Because that's been kind of one of the things I've been theorizing the entire time, was that Shang Qinghua had like a side gig making this smut about the two of them, and was cashing in on the fact that it came out that Shin Qingqiu and Lo Binghe were in a relationship, and he was like, oh, well, this is my chance to write the smut I always wanted to write about you two, and now spread it through this universe. So I've been thinking it's Shang Qinghua this entire time. But no, she pointed out, as well as Eshvok says, I'm not sure if anyone has pointed this out yet, but Liu Mingyan is the author of Regret of Chunshan. Her name consists of the characters for Willow, Liu, Drizzle Mist, Mingyan, and she uses the pen name Liu Su Mianhua, which literally means sleeping flower among the willows, and plays on her surname. The pen name is also an anagram for Mianhua Su Liu, which is an idiomatic expression that means to go whoring. She's supposed to be like this beautiful, stoic woman, and her pen name is about being a whore? What? And then they said the 3 Taoist nuns, who are part of Binghe's harem in Proud Immortal Demon Way, were fans of the Regret of Chunshan and became close friends with Liu Mingyan. We see this in the showdown between Bing Mei and Bing Gay in the extra. Now, I remember the nuns being over in the demon realm looking for the author, but I thought it was referring to Shang Qinghua. The nuns were off to see the author. That's what I thought that it meant. And it's heavily implied that they are the author of the thicker booklet 3545, the author's name being Three Holy Mothers. Now, I do remember in the discussion for that part with the thicker booklet, I do remember in the discussion seeing the Three Holy Mothers being like, were the nuns the authors? I do remember that. But then I was like, you would think that they would spend a little bit more time talking about it if that were the case. But then Tardy to the Party in 3B says, if I remember correctly, when the three nuns were hanging around Liu Mingyan, where OG Lo Binghe finds the Resentment of Chenshan book, they were saying how excited they were to finally meet the author, which is Liu Mingyan. And I was like, what? What? I want to make sure there's none of these other comments talking about that as well. That comment is not... And then, yeah. But here's my thing. This is why I'm a little bit peeved at MXTX. If I'm assuming, since everyone's talking about this now and the moderators approved it, that means that these last 4 chapters aren't going to talk about it at all. Because otherwise, why would the mods approve it being okay to read now? So that means it's not going to get mentioned in 97 or 98, and it's not going to get mentioned in chapters 99, 100, which is fine. I'm okay with that. I kept thinking it was going to get brought up in these next 4 chapters, but apparently not, because I'm getting approved to read them now. But that means that it's just a detail? And that's it? MXTX, I'm a little disappointed in you. I am, because honestly, in her other works, I'm not going to spoil Modao Zushi or Heaven Official's Blessing for you, but in her other works, there are plot points that kind of, there are some plot points that get kind of dropped along the way, but they're relatively like really simple plot points, like stuff that's like a throwaway comment or a throwaway thing. The regret of Chenshan is frequented throughout the story and is a constant running gag, and for your punchline to be that Liu Mingyan is the author and you have no other explanation of it, it's just some rando fact, there's so much you can do with that. There's so much you could play with that, especially knowing that Liu Qinghe is kind of maybe in love with Shin Xingqiu. You're not going to play with that? That is a golden opportunity missed. And that made me a little disappointed in MXTX. I was like, wow, you missed a chance for a ripe joke or a ripe trolling of Shin Qingqiu, or there's so many opportunities with that factoid that it's just something random. It's just a throwaway giveaway. And a lot of people in the comments were like, well, it's not confirmed. And I'm like, that's such a wasted opportunity. And I'm not mad at MXTX. It's just, it's very adherent of that this is the first story that they did. Because later on, even the small plot lines that are kind of abandoned, I felt like they were still done with enough satisfaction that you're like, oh, we're just going to drop that. Okay, fine. But you were okay with it. This, I was like, you missed a goose. There's a golden goose lying with that factoid that I felt like was just kind of abandoned. So, okay, I guess I know now. But I was kind of like, what a wasted opportunity to expand on that and mine some gold out of it. But... oh, well, so now I know. Now I know, and we can move on. So anyway, a Cardboard Sheep says, also Shin Yan, meaning kind of sort of the Endless Abyss. There is a fiction on AO3 where Shin Yan reincarnates as the Endless Abyss. I'm not surprised. Spoiler, Lo Binghe and the Endless Abyss live happily ever after. I love this fandom so much. I feel like things like this are why the fandom are so feral. It just is. And there has been so much art shared on Discord the last several weeks. I was going to do a feral fandom art thing, but it's just, there's too much. I'd be here all day sharing it with y'all. But if y'all are on the Patreon, there's a lot of fan art, especially with the Shinju and Yu Qinyang chapters. Oh my God. There's one artist that did this alternate universe where where Yu Qingyang is healing with Shinju. Oh, the line work. Oh, the expressions. It's absolutely amazing. I'm just obsessed with it. I love it so much. But yeah, so there's a lot to go with there, but that made me laugh out loud really, really a lot, Cardboard Sheep. Also, Cardboard Sheep says, I'm in the camp ultimately of Bingyan is supposed to be dysfunctional and it's supposed to be a feature or funny. Does it all land for me? No, but some of it does. For example, when Bingay, who was written to be a badass, all-powerful stallion protagonist with 3-digit harem of flowers, turned into a jealous housewife. I think that's kind of funny, which I agree with. There's a lot that Lo Binghay does that I find really, really humorous. But then they say that jealous housewife manipulating his low sex drive husband into kinks and not letting him hang around with his friends and family, not as funny. And that's kind of, I'm on the same page as you, Cardboard Sheep. That's kind of my thing as well. And then they said, I didn't remember the first chapter of this chapter set, which was 89 and 90, being like it was, but yeah, you could argue Bingay was trying to kink negotiate with the booklets, but if so, he was doing it very poorly. Yeah, I feel like it's been like a month or two since I've read 89, 90 at this point, so I've kind of like moved on from it, but I thought that comment was worth bringing up. And Anime Annie kind of adds to that, saying, I will say, creating scenes between Shang Qinghua and Lo Binghay as being fictional stories within the Scum Villain self-saving universe does ultimately make me think that this part of the extra chapters may have also been Mo-Zhang Tongzhu, MXTX's way of exploring other tropes within BL stories and seeing what worked with her style of writing and what didn't. Yeah, I feel like Scum Villain, now that we're entering, like, I feel like volume 4 with the extras are lots of ideas and lots of tropes that MXTX is working with that she's trying to figure out, like, what do I like? What do I not like? What do I want to expand upon in future stories? What do I want to kind of drop? I am very glad that some of the things that I find very frustrating, she's dropped in future stories, and some of the things that I've found intriguing with Scum Villain, she's expanded upon. But I will say, in regard to Scum Villain, one thing that made it unique from her other two stories, which I love about Scum Villain, is the whole idea of the transmigration and the isekai and like making a modern take within a medieval world. Like, I would love to see that concept now that she's wrote Modao Zushi and Heaven Official's Blessing. I would love to see her revisit a modern setting with a medieval or, you know, ancient literature twist to it now that she has a lot more experience under her belt as a writer. And I hope that her fourth novel kind of does that. I heard rumors that it was going to be more modern, which I'm like, I'm kind of all for, right? So I think that would be really cool. And most of the only Danmai that I've read so far has been, you know, kind of historical fiction. So it'd be cool to read Danmai that are more like modern, right? I think of Donghua like Link Click, but I know that's not technically a Danmai. But yeah, so oh my god, I can't believe I only have comments for one more section left, one more chapter set next week left. Oh my gosh, which there'll be a lot going on next week, and don't worry, even after I record next week, I'm still going to answer all of your questions, and maybe this summer we'll do a live stream. We'll see. I don't know. It depends on if there's enough demand for it, but if people want to talk about it. But I am still going to answer people's questions and definitely do that. So the only thing that sucks about Scum Villain is that there's not a lot of extra material to react to with Scum Villain. That's kind of the problem. At least with Modao Zushi and Heaven Official's Blessing, there's so much material and adaptations you can look through. Like the audio drama is still ongoing. The Donghua for Heaven Official's Blessing is getting animated. There's supposed to be like an OVA coming out. Like there's a lot of stuff in the works. And poor Scum Villain is off to the side. But having read what I've read now, I kind of see why the animation studio's like, I don't know if we want to animate this. So at least parts of it. So because that's pretty hefty material and they'd have to censor a lot. So we'll see what happens. But one thing I'm super excited about is getting to these two chapters. I am obsessed with Shang Qinghua's perspective. This is the Midnight Sun of Scum Villain. This is everything. I love Shang Qinghua's perspective. Him and Mobei-Jun's dynamic are my cup of tea. I'm like, yes, please. Let's go. Let's get this little bastard, this rat bastard and his tsundere boyfriend. So yeah. So when we last left off, Shang Qinghua, it said he suffered a good beating and hugged his knees, crouching his chair. And I don't like him getting beat up. Don't think that I do. I don't like him getting beat up at all. And Mobei-Jun's doing it. So Mobei-Jun's definitely a little bit more aggressive than Lo Binghay in that regard. I'll give him that. I'll give Lo Binghay that. He is not intentionally as aggressive. But How many times during the main story did we want Shang Qinghua to get his just desserts, and now he's actually getting it? And I'm like, oh, well, I kind of don't want you to get beat up. So we'll see. We'll see. But we're going to start. We've wasted enough time. It's been 15 minutes. Thank you all so much for watching with me. I'm so excited. I can't wait to see what these two chapters give us, but we're going to find out with chapters 97 and 98. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. And let's go. Chapter 97. Of course, the reason an urge was an urge was because it could usually be checked and because it shouldn't actually be carried out. Not even removing his boots, Mobei-Jun lay upon Shang Qinghua's brand new, not once slept on bed. Shang Qinghwa's heart was as desolate as a winter wasteland. My king, this is Sangzhong Mountain. A highly lethal pillow flew over and struck Shang Qinghua, making him grimace in pain. A highly lethal pillow. Oh my God. Oh my God. Just... Shang Qinghua picked up the pillow. He attempted tact. My king, that is my bed. Mobei-Jun stuck up a finger and waved it at him. Cool and aloof, he said one word. Mine. Understood. Because Shang Qinghua's whole person belonged to Mobei-Jun, his things also belonged to Mobei-Jun. Naturally, this included his bed. So, what did he say there? A reference to the super... Oh, that's from the previous chapter. Did the reverse also stand? At this kind of time, that one saying applied, but with a twist. What's yours is mine. What's mine is also mine. Shang Qinghua rolled off the chair with a huff and silently went to pick up the broken pieces of a teacup at his feet. He began to hum a little tune as he did. You're on the bed and I'm on the ground. I get radish husks and you eat meat by the pound. While tidying his new room. At least a single pillow had been kindly bestowed upon him. Before, he hadn't even had that. Know how to be content with your situation, and you'll always be happy. He cuddled his pillow. It was finally time to retire after a long day of service. We're making slow progress. A pillow is better than nothing. Mobei-Jun is slowly, the ice is slowly melting around Mobei-Jun. He is a full demon after all. 3 days later, Shang Qinghua was hardworking as a happy little honeybee. Mobei-Jun had slept in the leisure house for those 3 days, then disappeared without a word. Only with this had Shang Qinghua fully realized just how unscientifically god-tier the cheat he'd given Mobei-Jun was. 3 days. In 3 days, there had been no warning bell, no suspicion, no nothing. Not a single person found out that a demon had strutted all the way up to live in Onding Peak and ordered about a future elite logistics disciple as his own beast of burden. Like a freed surf singing in joy, Shang Qinghua floated about at full energy for a while, right up until he received his next mission from an old Onding Peak lord. Onding Peak's missions were invariably day-to-day miscellany, differing only in whether you battled through logistics or struggled on the front lines, but it was inevitably alarming to be in close proximity with dangerous organisms. For example, rushing in to deliver blood-replenishing talismans and pills to Bison Peak when they were in the thick of battle with resentful spirits was a cruel and frightful type of mission, no matter how you looked at it. At least Mobei-Jun was a capable protector. Shang Qinghua thought Mobei-Jun had already tossed him to the back of his mind. But on several later occasions, when he ended up in hot water, he would be fished up in passing by some strange creature that was clearly demonic in appearance and was thusly able to remain intact. This really counted as stick close to me and I'll protect you, didn't it? Shang Qinghua couldn't help but conclude that clinging to thighs and whatever was both useful and quite necessary, if it weren't, he never would have survived this far. He's like, well, if Mobei-Jun's gonna protect me, then I'm gonna let him do just that. Part 3. One day, Shang Qinghua's concise great system delivered a new command. I love doing it with the... Become the Onding Peak head disciple within 3 years. 3 years? He'd already run missions to the outside world and made a good showing under Mobei-Jun's care. But if he wanted to become head disciple, He would also have to pay more than a little attention to the affairs within Sangjiang Mountain itself. 3 years? I feel like Shen Qingqiu was like, I feel like his system was like, solve the world's crisis in 30 minutes or die. And here, Shang Qinghua is like, it's like you're playing Roller Coaster Tycoon, and it's like an opening mission where it's like, you got to get 1,500 guests in within 3 years or we're going to shut the place down. That seems very doable in comparison. As everyone knew, all the cannon fodder supporting cast in Proud Immortal Demon Way only had an IQ of 40. Therefore, the so-called palace intrigue was pretty much all at this level. So, the old Onding Peak Lord already had a head disciple, let's call him A. A was outstanding to the max, where outstanding meant being a master of serving tea, changing water, washing clothes, folding blankets, and that was considered a dab hand at housekeeping services in the center. Some days, the old Peak Lord requested that A make 12 delicious splash cakes and send one to each peak. All Shang Qinghua needed to do at such a time was stealthily scatter a ton of salt or sugar on every flat cake that A had meticulously made in order to render them flat out unpalatable. Repeat the above process 3 times, and okay. Now the old Peak Lord has finally lost all hope in his former senior disciple. Think about it. If you can't even make a good flat cake, what can you possibly do? What? That's all he has to do? What? Now, all Shang Qinghua needed to do was display his expert culinary skills a couple of times, and he would successfully ascend. This was called, if you don't have enough IQ, make up for it with stupid plot twists. If you can't do the best, then be the worst. If you can't do the best, then be the worst is such a tagline for Shang Qinghua. If the plot is so imbecilic that readers roast it like crazy, then that's also kind of success. You wrote this! In Proud Immortal Demon Way, these types of plots were too numerous to count. The way in which readers flocked together all year round to roast them could have been said to be one of the greatest spectacles of Zondian comment section, and the fiercest roaster of all was none other than Peerless Cucumber. Well, of course, as Shang Qinghua thought about this, he couldn't help but feel a bit of nostalgia for those comment section complaints, and those companions, and for the one dear friend in particular. He truly missed the force behind those inexhaustible howls that ran along the lines of airplanes shooting towards the sky. It's exactly because you have these kind of ideas that you're only a third-rate stallion novel writer. However, as the Onding Peak head disciple, his troubles only increased. For example, in his time as an outer disciple, he would never have the chance to descend the mountain on a quest with Shen Qingqiu and Liu Qingge. How many fucking lives of disastrous karma must he have lived to draw this super special prize? Sangjiang Mountain placed an emphasis on maintaining kinship between peers. It was common for a handful of head disciples to group up and sally out on side quests every now and then. On this one, the division of labor between them, the 3 of them, was clear. Liu Qingge was the thug hired to be the vanguard, while Shen Qingqiu was in the center, in charge of feigning civility and deploying sneak attacks and finishing blows, as well as waving his fans and being a poser, but don't let anyone know that he said that. And Shang Qinghua? Naturally, he was the one to be in charge of driving the carriage, making inn reservations, carrying luggage, managing both the trip's incomes and expenses, logistics, you know? Is he going to be the third wheel in my crack ship of Liu Qingge and Shen Qingqiu? If only he had been let off so easily, that would have been great. They say that at night, if you stick your head over the edge of the well and look into its mouth, you'll see your reflection within, looking up as it smiles faintly and beckons. Out of nowhere, it drags people in and drowns them. Sometimes you'll even see your dead relatives. Shang Qinghua coughed. Shen Zhizhong, Liu Shidi, can you let me finish first? He put the scroll down. Shen Qingqiu whisked a book out from his sleeve. He could turn on his poser act anytime and anywhere, sitting or standing. At present, he was leaning on the trunk of an old banyan tree in the shade, putting his magnificent scholarly essence on full display. Meanwhile, Liu Qingge had already gone to stand by the mouth of the well and stuck his head over the edge to look inside. Liu Qingge wanted to wrap things up as fast as possible to avoid having to interact with Shen Qingqiu at any point during this trip, and Shen Qingqiu wanted to let Liu Qingge finish doing all the hard work and get lost as fast as possible. Neither one cared to burden himself with the other's presence. Each had their own considerations, and neither was listening to Shang Qinghua's careful explanation of the mission. Liu Qingge looked back up. It didn't. Shang Qinghua understood. Liu Qingge meant my reflection didn't smile faintly and beckon to me. He spread his hands. Well, how about we have Xin Shizhong go over and try? Xin Qingqiu stowed away his book, swapping it for a folding fan. He strolled over to the side of the well. Please step aside. Liu Qingge had already stepped aside a good dozen paces. Xin Qingqiu carelessly took a look at the well, but this also seemed to yield no results. Shang Qinghua flipped through the scroll, paper rustling. Well, that's so strange. This clearly said. The unfortunate thing was, no matter how hard he rustled the paper, he couldn't drown out the sound of Xin Qingqiu's malicious question. We've both tried. Isn't it your turn? Sure enough, in this world, even the monsters bullied the weak and feared the strong. When the other two had looked, they hadn't seen a damn thing. But when it was Shang Qinghua's turn, he clearly saw his own reflection coquettishly wave its hand. Without another word, Liu Qingge smacked his sword hilt. With a powerful arc, Cheng Lan flew from its sheath and rushed into the well. After a moment of silence, the tranquil surface of water began to churn and bubble. Shang Qinghua scrupulously took one step back and then another, retreating a safe distance away, only to hear a burst of ghastly wailing before a giant wispy blob of spirit spewed out of the well and shot into the sky. Liu Qingge smashed apart the clump of women's heads that were chasing and biting at him. Oh, get back! Usually, once the fighting started, any Onding Pink disciples not in charge of replenishing supplies were supposed to scram as far away as possible and hang back at a safe location. Unfortunately, Shang Qinghua had miscalculated and didn't scram far enough. All his means of egress were blocked by resentful spirits, which had taken the form of a white haze. Now that things had come back to this, he could only bust out his special ability. He rolled his eyes back in his head and he collapsed on the spot. Playing dead was a time-tested technique. Oh my God. In the battle, I wonder if he did that in the Immortal Alliance conference originally. In the chaos of battle, Liu Qingge and Xin Qingqiu accidentally pressed their backs together, and their faces simultaneously contorted with looks of revulsion. Xin Qingqiu had already shut out a spiritual blast, which brushed by Liu Qingge's shoulder as it passed. Liu Qingge, angered, immediately retaliated with a blow. Great. The entirety of their combat forces were now ignoring the enemy in order to fight amongst themselves. Are you blind? Xin Qingqiu yelled. What are you hitting? Liu Qingge wasn't any more polite. Well, who hit first? Who went blind first? Shang Qinghua lay on the ground, eyes still rolled back. He had clearly seen when a few moments ago a faint white shadow had peeked out from behind Liu Qingge. Xin Qingqiu's attack had pressed and passed Liu Qingge's shoulder to disperse it. As he watched, the blows his peers rained down on each other grew fiercer and fiercer, their eyes growing red with bloodlust. Forgetting to play dead, he sat up and called weakly, Hey guys, you guys don't fight. Liu Shidi, you misunderstood. In fact, Xin Shizhong was just... Xin Qingqiu flung out his hand, and several deep cracks were smashed into the wall by Shang Qinghua's head. Dust and pebbles streamed down. If you're going to die, then die completely, Xin Qingqiu said icily. Don't change your mind halfway. Without another word, Shang Qinghua collapsed and went back to continually playing dead! Oh my God! At last, they sealed away the well creature and all the resentful spirits that had collected in a retrieval vessel, not missing a single one. Shang Qinghua led over the cart and horse, without sparing them a glance. Liu Qingge took off down a different road. Shang Qinghua said hurriedly, Oh, Liu Shide, where are you going? Liu Qingge snorted, I will not journey alongside a backstabbing colleague. Xin Qingqiu clapped his hands and smiled, Well, how wonderful. For my part, I don't care to journey alongside somebody who's all brawn and no brains. Shang Shidi, let's go. Which we'll talk about this in the discussion, but oh my God. He grasped Shang Qinghua's shoulder, and Shang Qinghua squeaked in agreement, through teeth clenched in pain. Finally struggling free of Xin Qingqiu's evil clutches, he caught up with Liu Qingge to caution him, Liu Shidi, Shizhong has a word of advice to offer. Don't cultivate by yourself all the time. It's easy to fall into a chi deviation. Liu Qingge still hadn't responded when, on the other side of the road, Xin Qingqiu used his base of his fan to rap on the rails of the cart. And Shang Qinghua hurried back. I wonder if that was right before he went into the cave and would have suffered the qi deviation, but then Shin Qingqiu transmigrated into, or Shin Yan transmigrated into Shin Qingqiu and went to tell him in the cave. That would have been insane. Liu Qingge still hadn't responded when on the other road, Shin Qingqiu used the base of his fan to rap on the cart and Shang Qinghua hurried back. The whole way home, he watched Shin Qingqiu closely while driving the cart. Shin Qingqiu was leaning on the side of the carriage reading a book, but under Shang Qinghua's stare, his expression grew darker and darker. He narrowed his eyes. What are you staring at me for? Shin Shizhong, I really wasn't going to say anything, Shang Qinghua said timidly, but since you asked me so sincerely, then the book you're holding is upside down. In a split second, Shin Qingqiu's face reddened. He abruptly rose and drew his sword. No, don't do anything rash! Shin Qingqiu had the thinnest face. If you tore down his pretenses right in front of him, he would remember you for a lifetime. Shang Qinghua was already regretting the quip, but if a person like Shin Qingqiu, who had perfected the art of poserhood, was holding a book upside down, he really must have been incensed. That sounded about right. He had gone to all that trouble to do a good thing, but the result hadn't met his expectations. But if that was the problem, then he should just go and explain himself to Liu Qingge. Just admit he was trying to help him out. But Shin Qingqiu wouldn't do that. If you won't do it, then just let me help you explain, thought Shang Qinghua. But Shin Qingqiu wouldn't compromise his own pride. Maybe he was too embarrassed. People really shouldn't twist themselves into knots. That's just self-torture. Shin Qingqiu stared at him with a vicious gaze, and cold sweat flowed down Shang Qinghua's back. After a while, Shin Qingqiu finally sat back down and sheathed his sword. With great effort, he composed himself and then said with a superficial smile, Shang Qinghua, shut up, all right? Shang Qinghua's heart itched furiously and ferociously. He raised a hand. Can I say one more thing? Shin Qingqiu rubbed his temple with his right hand and then lifted his chin to indicate permission to speak. Shang Qinghua looked at him with an earnest gaze and then spoke the most meaningful and heartfelt string of words he had spoken since an electric current had shocked him into proud immortal demon way. If, in the future, you see someone fall into qi deviation, don't panic and don't rush up rashly thinking you can save them. You must stay calm and call for help. Don't try to do it yourself. If you don't, you'll definitely be more of a hindrance than anything, and you'll make a big mess, and you'll abandon yourself to despair from then on. You'll never be free of it for the rest of your life. Even jumping into the Yellow River won't wash you clean. Shin Qingqiu was mystified. If someone else fell into qi deviation, what would that have to do with me? Why would I panic? Why would I want to help? Shang Qinghua's face was the very definition of, I knew you'd say that. Either way, just make sure you remember. So is he talking about in that moment with Yu Qingyan? Is that what he's talking about with the cave? Or is he referring to like back whenever Shin Qingqiu gets transmigrated from Xinyan and helps Liu Qingge? Comments down below if you know exactly what moment he's talking about. My mind has genuinely gone blank as to what he's referring to. Interesting. Once Shang Qinghua became the Peak Lord, he at long last no longer needed to bow and scrape to anyone. So all it took was the flapjacks, fixing those. Oh, well, that's good to know. A busy life was still a busy life, but at least he had been promoted from exploited servant girl to head of internal affairs. This totally counted as a rapid progress in long steps. Apparently, that particular person on Qijing Peak whom no one could afford to offend had fallen ill. After he recovered, a secret meeting was held on Shangding Peak. In the side hall of Shangding Peak, 10 of the 12 Peak Lords were present and accounted for. Do you feel that Qingqiu Shidi has been very odd these past few days? Yu Qingyang asked, completely focused on the topic. Several Peak Lords agreed. More than just odd, said Liu Qingge in a solemn tone. He's practically a whole different person, muttered Qi Qingqi. So it's happened. So the transmigration has happened. Just then, Shang Qinghua stepped into the side hall. So he wasn't a Peak Lord for very long before all this went down. Oh! Worn and weary from travel, over the past few years, Shan Shao's Peak's dragon bone cantaloupe seeds had been selling quite well outside the sect, and he had already spent several months rushing about on sales trips. He'd been dragged into this mysterious meeting as soon as he got back, and he still didn't quite understand the situation. He rubbed his hands together. About that, I haven't seen Shin Shizhong for a few days. Could everyone please elaborate? How exactly has he been odd? He had a calm and harmonious conversation with me for a whole 2 hours, said Yu Qingyan. Shang Qinghua was speechless and terrified. Oh my God, how odd! That really is odd! Ordinarily speaking, the bridge between these two was impassably burned. Without rebuilding the bridge, there was absolutely no chance of harmonious developments, and thus, far the T-5 sentences until they part on terrible terms rule that they had held true to the baseline normal. A whole 2 hours worth of a calm and harmonious exchange, this was more than a fantastical level of progress. In the Lingxi caves, he helped me, said Liu Qingge. Shang Qinghua finally remembered. Right. Well, by now, Shen Qingqiu should have already helped Liu Qingge to his death. So how could Liu Qingge still be hanging about, sitting here to attend a meeting? Was it possible that the warning Shang Qinghua had given Shen Qingqiu after their defeating the well creature had actually made an impact? Well, not in the way you would think! The other Peak Lords continued to list Shen Qingqiu's every behavioral oddity over the last few days, sustaining injury while beating back an impetuous demoness. Yes! This, stepping forward to protect his disciples and showing care and concern, that? Shang Qinghua's face began to twitch. He thought about it over and back and forth, but no matter how he looked at it, this kind of altruistic, self-sacrificing character behavior was seriously out of character. Unable to resist, he said, wait, could he have been possessed, could he? Wei Shizhong, how is your sword trials terrace? Did he visit? At the sword trials terrace of Wei Qinghua's Wanjian Peak, there was a mystical sword known as Hongjing, which no person had ever been able to draw. But if something like a resentful soul or an evil spirit were to approach the blade, it would be unsheathed of its own accord. If Shen Qingqiu had already been possessed by some impure creature, as long as he approached the sword's trials terrace, Hongjing would emphatically sound the alarm. However, Wei Qingwei said, he went 3 times and tried to draw at every one, and there was no sign of movement. There is no demonic energy in his body, Yu Qingyan said slowly. I could detect no signs that he's been possessed. So they were all having, during this time when Shen Qingqiu was just like, live my life, now I'm in a new body. They were having a secret meeting to be like, something's going on. Like this whole time, they have been like weirded out. I guess they got used to it, but at the beginning, they were weirded out like, what's happening? Which is so hilarious because Shen Qingqiu was like, they don't even suspect me. And they were like, yes, something's going down. Oh my gosh. Qi Qingxing spread her hands. It doesn't make any sense for him to be possessed. Possession at least involves some sort of goal, but he hasn't been doing anything. He's even more idle than before. After the discussion session, they remained unable to reach a decision. In the end, Mu Qingfang said, well, it's not necessarily a case of possession. In my opinion, perhaps Shen Shizhong's old problem has reappeared. All the Peak Lords looked at each other. What this old problem was didn't need to be said aloud. Everyone understood. Shen Qingqiu as a person was ambitious and aggressive, proud and arrogant. This wasn't the first time he tried to force instant success. Maybe he had gone off to cultivate in secret again and had ended up falling into a qi deviation. Mu Qingfang continues analysis. I have heard quite a few such cases. When a person is hit on the head with a large rock, or perhaps they suffer a violent shock, sometimes they lose a few of their memories of the past. So it's not necessarily impossible for someone to fall into a qi deviation and forget their past, thus leading to their temperament to undergo major changes. Of course, Yu Qingyang asks, well, then is it possible to recover? Qi Qingxi wrinkled her nose. Zhengmen Shizhong, do you actually hope he'll remember and recover his previous character and conduct? Yu Qingyan started. Me? I cannot say. When he continued, it was earnestly. Even though the way he is now is overall very good as well, if he can remember, it will be for the better. Oh my God. Before, we have so much to talk about. Before, He never offered a proper greeting when he met Zhang Minshijong or his fellow sect members, one of the peak lords said in confusion. He never visited us at our homes, and when he spoke, it was all needles concealed in silk floss, full of biting sarcasm. What was good about that? The way he is now is quite an improvement. Yu Qingyang smiled faintly, but he did not speak. Because it's not the Shen Qingqiu that he knew. The last time I went to write his prescription for without a cure, I examined him, Mu Qingfeng said awkwardly. There were no significant symptoms, so it would be difficult to know where to begin. I'm afraid we can only let nature take its course. Having reached the verdict that Qijing Peak Lord has lost his memory, celebrate and spread the joyful news. The meeting adjourned. After this meeting concluded, Shang Qinghua felt he was very much obligated to investigate these strange happenings, in passing while delivering Qijing Peak's funds. But before Shang Qinghua started his investigation, he went to Baizan Peak. Normally speaking, in terms of seniority, Qijing Peak was ranked 2nd in Sangjiang Mountain and Baizan Peak was ranked 7th. After making his deliveries to the first-ranked Zhongjing Peak, his next stop should have been Qijing. But on the other hand, Shen Qingqiu was too hard to please, and Shang Qinghua had to rack his brains every time he went to figure out how to not offend him. On the other hand, Baizan Peak loved fighting, so Shang Qinghua felt safer giving them their funds first. Safer how? It was precisely the sense of safety a small shop owner felt when handing his protection fee to the local gang boss. The one who greeted him was Liu Qingge's Shidi, Zhizhu, who was as enthusiastic as always. The two exchanged some small talk, and after the handover was complete, Zhizhu said, "Will Shang Xizhang take care? I'm returning to the training grounds." When Shang Qinghua realized that Zhizhu seemed reluctant to see him leave, he said, "Well, Liu Shidi has been staying at Baizan Peak more often lately. Hasn't he, Shidi, had a sudden increase in cultivation?" Liu Qingge spent all of his time in the outside world looking for people to fight. No one on Baizan Peak was a match for him, and he typically only came back once a month at most. Whenever Baizan Peak's disciples and juniors flocked to Shansao Peak to seek treatment, that meant he had just returned. But lately, Shansao Peak's doorsteps had nearly been trampled flat by those great lords from Baizan Peak, and the medicinal peak funds were getting light. Mu Qingfan had started to ask Shang Qinghua for loans every few days. When Shang Qinghua which he found strange, he couldn't help but wonder, had an extraordinary genius who could stand up to Liu Qingge appeared on Baizan Peak? So he asked. Zhizhu drooped in gloom. "Well, it's not our peak. It's Shen Qingqiu." Shang Qinghua hadn't expected any earth-shattering news, so he just smiled and nodded. Shen Qingqiu. Shen Qingqiu! As Shang Qinghua digested the enormous amount of information contained in those two words, he was almost ascended out of shock on the spot. Shen Qingqiu? At Baizan Peak? At the Baizan Peak training grounds, no less. Doing what? Getting a one-sided beatdown from Liu Qingge? No, given his skill in drawing aggro, it was probably the group beatdown, but what if it became fatal? He's an important scum villain, you know. If he gets beaten to death, well, who's going to torment Bingay? "Shang Xizhang, what's that look in your eye?" Zhizhu asked after a silence. "Don't look at me like that. We didn't kill anyone. Shen Qingqiu's still alive, and no one's doing anything to him. You should ask what he's doing to us." So Shang Qinghua jogged with Zhizhu all the way to the training grounds. On the high basalt platform, Liu Qingge and Shen Qingqiu were in actual fact merely crossing swords in an orderly match. Liu Qingge's movements were much slower than usual. Rather than calling it crossing swords, you might as well have called it feeding his opponent training strikes. The space between his brows was still rather smooth, and it emanated none of his typical homicidal tendencies. Just then, Shen Qingqiu's sword struck air. He knitted his brows and his left hand twitched. Shang Qinghua's heart suddenly stretched taut. He glanced at Zhizhu out of the corner of his eye and saw that his expression also twitched, like he had urged to shout out loud. The two glanced at each other in a flash of wordless understanding. Zhizhu, his heart still palpitating, said in a low voice, "I always feel like Shen Qingqiu is about to deploy a concealed weapon dipped in poison or something." Shang Qinghua expressed his deep agreement. "Oh, heroes think alike! Heroes think alike!" It looked like Shidi understood this character very thoroughly. Exactly what he expected from his fellow who had once picked a fight with Shen Qingqiu at the brothel. They were old enemies who both soundly lost the faces of two whole peaks. Shin Qingqiu drew back Zhuya and stopped to think. For one, he didn't let out a laugh cold like rustling wind, and two, he didn't look askance at anyone. If one looked at him now, he would seem like a mild brow and peaceful gaze that still carried a modest air of elegant nobility. Soon after, Shin Qingqiu said, "Well, I don't understand." Liu Qingge flicked a swift and fierce flourish with his sword. "Don't understand what?" A disciple next to Zhiju muttered, "Heavens, he doesn't understand again." "I can't take it anymore," another disciple said quietly. "My stomach feels bad. I'm going back." "Shidi, wait for me." "Me too," Zhiju said hurriedly. His Shidi pushed him back. "Stay. Didn't you just get to go back?" On the platform, Shin Qingqiu said, Just then in those few moves, if I blocked your sword with my right hand and let loose a spiritual blast with my left, finding an opportunity to strike your stomach, I would have had a chance at winning." "Not possible," Liu Qingge scoffed. "Most possible," Shin Qingqiu persisted. "If you could have won, then why didn't you try it?" "Well, isn't this just sparring?" Shin Qingqiu said aloof. "Attacking in earnest would be out of line." Liu Qingge didn't bother to reply. Instead, he yelled into the crowd below the platform, "You, get up here!" The person he selected ascended the platform with an expression like the hero Yi Shui, grimly preparing to stare death in the face. Using the method that Shin Qingqiu had suggested, they traded a few blows with Liu Qingge before getting blown straight off the platform by Cheng Lan. Liu Qingge sheathed his sword and turned to Shin Qingqiu. "See? It wouldn't work." Shin Qingqiu snapped open his fan and waved it in front of his chest. "I see," he said, all smiles. Liu Shi's reflexes are too fast. It wouldn't work at all. Every time he says, "I don't understand," Liu Shizhong grabs someone to demonstrate until he understands. "Oh," Zhiju quietly complained to Shang Qinghua. "That's what it is. Oh my God." Oh, we have so much to talk about. No wonder the injuries at Baizan Peak had only increased the past few days. While Sanjiao Peak's front courtyard was as busy as a marketplace, Shang Qinghua had only one thought in response to this. That Shin Qingqiu had to be doing this on purpose. After he descended the platform, Liu Qingge continued to train, aka beat up, the Baizan Peak disciples. Shin Qingqiu and Shang Qinghua exchanged greetings and then walked down the mountain together. Just as they were about to exit through the gate, Zhiju caught up to them carrying 2 snacks, which he gave to Shin Qingqiu and Shang Qinghua. Shang Qinghua didn't understand, so he undid the tie to take a look. Inside, he saw 2 balls of bloody hairy things nestled together. "And this is..." "Liu Shizhong caught these 2 short-haired beasts," Zhiju said, expression stiff. "Apparently they taste very good. Shizhong, please take them back to your own peaks and cook them as you please." "Short-haired beast? What short-haired beast? Did I really ever create this creature? Is it edible? Are you sure?" It looked like Shin Qingqiu was highly suspicious of the creature's editability. "Thank you for your trouble." Shizhong said this is a gift in return for the tea leaves that Xijing Peak recently sent, Zhiju recited woodenly. Tea leaves? Shin Qingqiu had given Liu Qingge tea leaves? What was this? Were they exchanging presents? Internally, Shang Qinghua yelled, "Holy shit!" While externally he kept a smile on his face. "You mean to say that this is all thanks to Shin Shizhong's generosity? What sort of high-quality tea leaves were those?" "They were harvested from the tea fields of my senior disciple Mingfan's family," Shin Qingqiu said affably. "As for whether they're high quality, won't Shang Shidi know if he comes for tea at Xijing Peak?" Shang Qinghua thickened his face, shameless. "Then I have Liu Shizhong's generosity to thank as well." So, each carrying a sack, talking about this and that, they walked toward Xijing Peak. I thought the first time that Shin Qingqiu met with him was during the Immortal Alliance conference, and he'd been avoiding him ever since, but that's not the case. As soon as they passed the mountain gates, serene wind caressed their faces, and a faint bird song chittered away. It was an atmosphere entirely distinct from that of the outer world. Together they walked over a soft layer of green bamboo leaves that covered the ground and found themselves feeling several times more refreshed. For some reason, Shin Qingqiu's mood was quite good. He didn't look the least bit like he had lost to Liu Qingge. He even offered an idle bit of praise. Liu Shi's swordsmanship is truly something. Shang Qinghua couldn't resist reminding, Shin Shizhong, how many times did you lose?" Shin Qingqiu thought it over. "Oh, you're asking about this morning? Well, it was only 7 or 8 times. Then how are you this calm?" Shouldn't you be gnashing your teeth in fury, tears straining your face, staining them like raindrops on flower petals, a cuckoo crying blood as you whip around to go back into the seclusion for 3 months, swearing to duel again? Don't you know you're being out of character? Can't you show a bit more dedication to your role? Shen Qinghua bashfully tapped the handle of his fan on his nape. There's nothing you can do about losing to Bison Peaks, Lord. It would be more accurate to say that winning would be more than the usual outcome. Shang Qinghua had no words. He felt there was no way to communicate with this guy. He's lost his memory. He definitely fell into chi deviation and lost his memory. If this Shen Qinghua and Liu Qingge were playing out a scene of friendly senior and respectful junior, full of harmonious fraternal love between fellow sect members, oh heavens, maybe in a few days, Shen Qinghua and Lo Binghe would be striking up a flirtatious banter. The second, after this frightful vision, flashed through Shang Qinghua's mind, a white shadow darted towards them. And something sticky and clingy suddenly threw itself into Shen Qinghua's arms. That soft little lump called out, "Shizun!" Shen Qinghua was nearly knocked on his back. He swayed and then grabbed onto the thick bamboo stalk and finally managed to regain his footing. He noticed Shang Qinghua detachedly observing the scene, expressionless. You couldn't fault Shang Qinghua for his frozen expression. At the sight of that little lady killer with his two arms encircling Shen Qinghua's waist like a steel hoop, the name Binghe had nearly escaped his mouth. Shen Qinghua stiffly waved his fan in one hand, embarrassed. If you're going to call me, then just call. Don't drag your voice out like that, throwing yourself at people every day. And while your Shishu is here, what manner of decorum is this? Lo Binghe slowly removed his hands and stood straight. He obediently said, "Shang Shishu." Then, after this disciple has finished morning lessons, he waited here for Shizun to return. I forgot myself in the moment of excitement. Great Master Airplane shooting towards the sky, heart nearly crumbled. Lo Binghe switched to hugging Shen Qinghua's arm. "Shizun, why were you out here for so long?" Well, there were a lot of people today. As Shang Qinghua took in Shen Qinghua's leisurely and contented smile, he couldn't resist guessing how many times the Qijing Peak Lord hadn't understood earlier, and how many times he'd had Liu Qingge demonstrate for him. Lo Binghe automatically took the sack out of Shen Qinghua's hands. "Well, next time, can I go too?" "That depends on your progress in swordplay," Shen Qinghua said casually. "There's some sort of monster in the sack. Your Liu Shizhu says it's edible, but see if you can clean off the hair and figure out how to cook it." "You've made Binghe into a kitchen girl." "Only the female protagonists are allowed to eat the male protagonist's cooking. Oh, can't you stay in your place?" Oh, forget it! Shang Qinghua didn't have the energy. "Oh," Lo Binghe happily agreed. As he shook the sack, the thing inside suddenly began to struggle. "Oh, Shizun, it's still alive!" By the time they arrived at the drawing room of the bamboo house, Shen Qinghua's flock of disciples had surrounded the mysterious creature and were taking turns poking the sack. With each poke, the short-haired beast let out a plaintive cry, and yet they were delighted each time, clicking their tongues in wonder. "Oh, Shizun is still really alive. Well, what do we do if it's still alive? Do we still kill it and eat it?" "Well, let's not. It's so pitiful." Shang Qinghua forced himself to ignore this flock of young disciples sitting over the ground and lowered his head to drink his tea, his heart twitching. He remembered the last time he'd come. Every disciple had worn a face full of great bitterness and deep resentment. They'd stood on pines or sat like clocks, each with an old text in hand, reciting whatever they were like they were chanting curses, quoting chapter and verse when they spoke, a musical cadence to their voices. And when he looked at them today, was this still the renowned Qijing Peak that produced countless poser youths full of literary airs? This place had become a daycare center for ADH children! "If it's still alive, then keep it as a pet," said Shen Qinghua. "Well, let's eat it. Let's just eat it," Ming Fan hurriedly retorted. "We've never kept one before. We don't know how much it needs to eat, and changing its water and taking it out for walks and whatnot, it'll be awfully troublesome." Ning Ying pouted. "Well, that's enough. If we keep it, it definitely won't be you taking care of it. Shizun would obviously give it to Alo." She lifted her head and asked, "Shizun, where'd you get this strange thing?" "Oh, the Bison Peak Lord gave it to me, a return gift for the tea." At this, Ning Ying whined. "Oh, Shizun, I don't like Bison Peak. They're so annoying. Last time they used his superior sword skills to bully Alo. They were chasing and beating him." Shang Qinghua thought this was quite normal. Bison Peak's uniform malice towards Lo Binghe was entirely natural. It was the sort of instinctive reaction a single-cell organism had towards traces of concealed evil. This wasn't throwing shade at Bison Peak. Shang Qinghua was a fan of theirs for his part. After enumerating their shortcomings, Ning Yingying put forth a request. Shizun, you have to help us teach them a good lesson. Puh. Shin Qingqiu choked once, and then turned towards Shang Qinghua and smiled politely as he coughed. These children, what are they on about? There ought to be harmony and familial affection within the sect. How could I teach them a good lesson for such a reason? Shang Qinghua repeatedly stated his agreement, returning to the same forced smile and drinking his tea like his life depended upon it. Miss Yingying, your Shizun doesn't need to make a move. Liu Qinghe has already taught them quite a cruel lesson. In fact, Shin Qingqiu is in charge of harmony and familial affection, and Liu Qinghe is in charge of teaching them a good lesson. This right here is a true nature of a hypocrite. Shang Qinghua was deeply comforted by this. Even after going through a chi deviation and losing his memory, sure enough, Shin Qingqiu was still his treacherous old self. Lo Binghe had gone to fetch a few tea leaves, and at this moment he entered the drawing room to present them to Shang Qinghua. Oh, come, Shidi. We have been indebted to Onding Peak's care for a long time now, said Shin Qingqiu. But one kid on the floor was still unwilling to back down. Shizun, you have to avenge Alo, Ning Yingying said, impassioned. Shin Qingqiu was at the end of his patience. Yingying, go play outside. Well, you mustn't avenge me or whatever else, Lo Binghe says hastily. It's just that this disciple's skill is inferior to theirs, and he lost face for Shizun and Qijing Peak. Your foundation is just a bit lacking, and you can't expect to catch up on them straight away, Shin Qingqiu said, offering words of comfort. As long as you remain diligent, given some time, you will assuredly surpass them. Ming Fan scoffed. It would take 100 years for him to surpass Bison Peak. Ning Yingying flew into a temper. Well, if you look down on Qijing Peak and Alo that much, well, why don't you just go to Bison Peak and see if they'll take you? Shin Qingqiu put his head in his hands. Didn't I tell you to go outside and play? Why are you still here? Binghe, get them outside quick. Don't make a circus of yourselves in here. Well, all right, Shizun, but as for this thing, are we keeping it or eating it? Shang Qinghua was struck dumb. He was choking down so much that his heart was about to stop. This scene, featuring Shin Qingqiu as the ever-attentive teacher and Lo Binghe as the clingiest hanger-on. What the hell was this? Don't fucking tell me that Shin Qingqiu really did go to Bison Peak and mess with people just to avenge Lo Binghe. This benevolent father and filial son act? No. It was more like lifting one's tray to eyebrow level. No. Treating each other as honored guests. This was even more fantastical than Shin Qingqiu and Liu Qinghe's harmonious spar. If things kept going on like this, maybe there really would be a day when they exchanged flirtatious banter. Pah! And if that day ever really came, he'd eat 3 kilos of shit. Have you done that yet? After Great Master Airplane finished swearing, he had a rare moment of careful thought. He had never quite used classical idioms properly, and he had hauled out his limited supply to describe Liu Mingyon's beauty. The ones he'd used with the highest frequency were soft bosoms trembling and as delicate as the finest gossamer. To use treating each other as honored guests was correct here, right? If he looked at the literal meaning, then yes, it was correct. At that moment, the Great Master Airplane shooting towards the sky, assiduously struggling to recover from this episode, he had not yet realized that the scum villain Shin Qingqiu had already been replaced by that unmatched hater, Peerless Cucumber. So he hadn't realized. To think that in the days of yore, when this guy's rants had grown excessively ferocious, Airplane had sometimes casually cursed him, maliciously praying that no matter how peerless his cucumber was, that he would never get a chance to use it for the rest of his life. Who would have expected that in some manner of speaking, this curse had been fulfilled? Oh, right, because Shin Qingqiu doesn't want to top. So yeah, he's never using the Peerless Cucumber ever again. These days, Binghe's mood was especially bad. Shang Qinghua could understand, as the stallion protagonist who, in the original work, could fuck his way across the continent solo, he had now captured and imprisoned Shin Qingqiu and, just imprisoned him. Imprisoned him and nothing else. Could you believe it? He was the original author, and he didn't even dare believe it. If he could still control the current Bingay with his pen, guided by the principle of satisfying the protagonist as satisfying the readers, he would have absolutely have let Lo Binghay defile Shin Qingqiu 100 times. Yeah, hundreds of times. Over and over like skewering a kebab. This definitely had nothing to do with his personal grievances against Peerless Cucumber. Definitely not. No props, position, or location would ever be repeated. Things would get easier once it was skewered, mind you. And of course, feelings would develop during the skewering. So, airplane shooting towards the sky, you basically would be like, oh, they'll just fuck till they love each other? Really? I'm glad that didn't necessarily work out the way you wanted. In comparison, chapter 98. In comparison, the current Bingay's life was the dull and arduous sort, in which he might go 3 years without knowing the taste of meat. Shang Qinghua couldn't help but feel sorry for his dear son. So, no brainless idiot would dare go up against Lo Binghay and be a nuisance at this kind of time. In the assembly hall of the underground palace, everyone hurried on about their own business. Xia Hualing was sewing together that giant net of immortal binding cables that Shang Qinghua had torn apart as she stole looks at Lo Binghay, sometimes biting her lip in dissatisfaction. Mobei-Jun was taking a nap in the west end of the hall, eyes closed. Shang Qinghua bounced his leg, idle to the point of agitation. He really didn't have anything to do, and he hadn't wanted to come to the assembly hall either. But this was demon territory. If he didn't stay within arm's reach of Mobei-Jun, who could say if he wouldn't be swallowed whole by some manner of bizarre creature? Just when he was about to crawl over to Mobei-Jun and risk a beating to request that his king find somewhere with less tense atmosphere to nap, Lo Binghay suddenly said one word. If. Every demon in the hall perked up their ears. What is he, Jareth from Labyrinth? If you hold unique feelings for a certain person, how can you make them understand your intentions? Lo Binghay asked. Poor Ice Brother. He was totally like a terminal patient desperately turning to any doctor he could find. Even though his question was veiled, how couldn't they all tell that he was looking for romantic advice? Moreover, he was actually trying to have a serious discussion about this sort of thing in front of his subordinates. Sure enough, people, or demons, just shouldn't fall in love, thought Shang Qinghua, because as soon as they do, their IQ drops like a stone. Obviously, no one dared to tear down Lo Binghay's facade and expose him directly, but this question was really unsuited to the demonic approach. After a long moment, not a single person had answered. In fact, the answer was so simple that any normal human could have given it to you. If you like someone, you should just tell them. Unfortunately, there was not a single normal person at the scene, and aside from Shang Qinghua, there were also no humans either. Mobei-Jun thought about it. With the paths his mind was given to take, there was no telling what he interpreted as unique feelings. Beat them up 3 times a day? Lo Binghay made a stop gesture with one hand and said wisely, "You don't need to answer." Of everyone present, the only one who had a natural advantage due to their gender, who therefore might be able to field this sort of question, was Xia Hualing, so the others all swept their gazes towards her. With WTF, why should I provide this sort of advice to a man that I want to take for myself? Written all over her face, the finely shaped lips and brows of Xia Meimei, who had been extremely popular in the original work, twitched several times. Finally, still spasming, she let out a dry, "Well, why doesn't my lord ask Senior Meng Mo?" "I've already asked," said Lo Binghay. No one knew better what sort of shit answer Meng Mo had given than Shang Qinghua. That guy was the same as Shang Qinghua. He was clearly of that just do them first persuasion. Shang Qinghua broke and let out a chuckle. Xia Hualing had been brooding, her chest full of repressed emotions, with nowhere to vent them. Latching onto his brakes, she erupted, "You dare! Who are you to sneak into the assembly hall and make a disturbance while my lord is discussing important matters?" That kind of question couldn't be called important matters, could it? And he'd only let out one sound. How dare that count as a disturbance? As this wasn't the first time that Xia Hualing had picked on him, Shang Qinghua was adept at meeting her with indifference. He kept himself planted in his seat, pretending that he was nothing more than empty air. As expected, Mobei-Jun was unconcerned. Xia Hualing saw that no one was paying attention to her and indignantly wrung her long fingernails. "My lord, Mobei-Jun brings him everywhere, every day, without the least bit of discretion, and even brings him to the assembly hall. What is the meaning of this?" Lo Binghe was also unconcerned. Well, you see him every day. Are you not used to him yet? Xia Hualing was going to faint. But this was the first time in months that Binghe had expressed an opinion on Shang Qinghua's existence. Immediately, Shang Qinghua started up an ecstatic internal chant of, "My son noticed me! He noticed me! Ha ha ha!" What he didn't expect was Lo Binghe taking a look at him saying, "Well, since you laughed, does that mean you have something to say?" Shang Qinghua was at a loss for words. Xia Hualing let out a "ha!" followed by, "Well asked, my lord. Since he is so familiar with Shin, with humans, he must have some remarkable and clever insight. All of us would do well to listen with respectable attention." Shang Qinghua turned to look back at Mobei-Jun, who was sitting behind him. Surprise, surprise, he had no intention of helping him out of this situation. So, Shang Qinghua braced himself and said decisively, "Well, of course I have something to say. The secret lies in 2 words. Be clingy. As they say, a fierce woman fears a clingy man. A brave hero fears a pampered lady. As long as your skills are up to par, you can grind an iron bar into a needle. Even if he's as straight as an embroidery needle, you can still bend him into a paperclip." "What's with this straight and bent?" Xia Hualing asked. "Don't speak the human realm's dialect, my lord. I think he's simply acting enigmatic on purpose." Lo Binghe, though, was unreservedly immersed in Shang Qinghua's account. "I'm still not clingy enough," he muttered. "Still?" Shang Qinghua babbled nonstop. "Oh, clinginess is the main tactic, but aside from this absolute truth, there's another terribly important angle that you must consider. Gentlemen must understand that women's love comes from admiration, and men's from a desire to protect. The matter of women we will not discuss for now. I'm convinced no woman could resist being subdued by my lord's peerless and godly strength, his elegant manner that defies the heavens, and his sincere affection, so we'll reserve ourselves to the other case. If you, no, my lord, if my lord wants a man to understand his true intentions, and furthermore to respond in kind, well, then what ought my lord do? Well, it's quite simple. No man doesn't wish for a weak, lovable, docile partner. And what do I mean by lovable? Lovable means some person or thing that can evoke a heart's tenderest affections. So a partner must be unquestionably be the most obedient, the most bullshit and flattery flowed forth in equal measure, and the crowd in the hall peered at Lo Binghe seated high above them. His face was gloomy, his pupils glowing red, and a murderous aura surged beneath the surface, painting a most vivid picture of untouchability, aka discontent. The distance between him and the words weak, cute, docile, and obedient was practically a bottomless chasm. Xia Hualing couldn't resist letting out a scoff. Shang Qinghua hurriedly shut his mouth. Lo Binghe rubbed his temple. "Continue." Having been given the official approval, Shang Qinghua continued to explain. "I'll take Shen Qingqiu as an example," he said, brimming with ill intent. "This guy, you know, he's a straight man. Oh, well, what does straight man mean? Well, a straight man is a normal man. Obviously, I'm not saying that you aren't normal, my lord. Rather, he very much values his dignity as a master and a teacher. And as teachers, they all like students who do as they're told. So if you want him to like you, the first step would be to listen to him and be good." The hall full of demons and beasts were practically stared stiff by his brazenness. "Impudence!" Xia Hualing snapped. You mean to have my lord pretend to be piteous and obediently listen to him? My lord is the grand ruler of the demon realm. How can he do such a shameless thing?" "That's right. That's precisely what I mean. Sha, turn around and take a look at the thoughtful expression on your lord's face. Does he look like he thinks this sort of thing is shameless?" Impassioned and vehement, his mouth running like a torrent from the heavens down to the earth, Shang Qinghua concluded his 20-long-minute romantic consultation. Xia Hualing had already throttled him to death with her eyes 10 million times, and as soon as Lo Binghe left, Shang Qinghua hurriedly moved over to Mobei-Jun's side, pressing close to seek protection. Mobei-Jun looked askance at him. "So, if you want to be liked by a man, the best method is to act pathetic?" Shang Qinghua thought about it. "Well, in theory, that would be correct." Mobei-Jun reached out his hand. Thinking he was about to be beaten up again, Shang Qinghua hurriedly put his hands over his head. But then, the pain he expected never arrived. Mobei-Jun only lightly tapped him on the top of his head. Afterward, seemingly in a bit of a good mood, he got up and started walking out of the assembly hall. Though Shang Qinghua was confused, he couldn't handle Xia Hualing staring at him from the side, her fiery gaze like that of a tiger eyeing its prey. So he hurried to catch up, taking 3 steps for every 2. Mobei-Jun thinks that Shang Qinghua likes him because he's been acting pathetic around him. Oh my god! Also, we're gonna go back and talk about this, but why is Shang Qinghua giving Lo Binghe advice? Is it only to make Shang Qinghua suffer? You rat bastard! We're gonna go back. Part 4. In the end, it was still a whole ruckus. As Shang Qinghua had planned in his outline, Maigu Ridge exploded into a mass of flying sand and countless pieces of rubble with roiling smoke and clouds of billowing dust. Moreover, he performed a heroic feat on the way and saved Mobei-Jun, who didn't know how to fly. When he grabbed that hand of Mobei-Jun's in mid-air, Shang Qinghua could clearly see the astonished disbelief in his eyes. Understandable. Mobei-Jun undoubtedly held the firm belief that Shang Qinghua hung by his side solely to protect his own pathetic little life, and the human soul's uses were, at most, flattery boasting about him, and a target for venting his anger and whatnot. And if they ever met any real danger, Shang Qinghua would definitely be the first to run to save his own ass. To be honest, Shang Qinghua himself had also held this firm belief. He dared say he was even more astonished, even more disbelieving than Mobei-Jun. Ever since then, perhaps because he had earned merit protecting his master and had performed well, his wages, material benefits, treatment, and so forth had all improved, and he was permitted to return to Sangjiang Mountain and visit his own home. Yu Qingyang, the great philanthropist, had let all bygones be bygones and even permitted him to return to Anding Peak, as well as continue holding the title of Peak Lord. These past few days in the leisure house, Shang Qinghua had, for the first time, truly been leisurely, to the point of agitation. After munching on 1/2 kilogram of melon seeds, he suddenly realized the system hadn't made a peep in a while. For once, Shang Qinghua took the initiative to poke it. The system gave him an earth-shattering response. Objective completed. Downloading return home function. Shang Qinghua was speechless. After a moment, he began to furiously shake the system's non-existent shoulders. Objective completed. Return home function. What return home function? Is this the one I'm thinking of? Oh, great system. This is the first time you've said so many words. Could you say a few more? I'm begging you, quick. Basic completion of Proud Immortal Demon Way's original outline achieved. Slight deviation in romance plotline. Objective complete. Retrieving function to return to original world. Download complete. Activate return home sequence. Basic completion of the original outline. That he agreed with. All the holes that needed to be filled had been filled, but this slight deviation of romance plot wasn't quite right. Binghe was now fully gay. How could you say that was a slight deviation? Fine. In fact, in his original outline, Binghe hadn't even had a romance plot line. He'd been doomed to fade away, alone and unaging forever. If you insisted on adding a romance plotline, well, all right, that was whatever. So putting aside all the system's rambling, this meant he could return to his original world? Tears streamed down Shang Qinghua's face. He hadn't written in so long. He reminisced about his airplane shooting towards the sky account with its fans and haters equally matched, reminisced about the crowd of trolls in the comment section, reminisced about the rich benefactors who'd given him tips, reminisced about the laptop that he used to use since his first year of university, eternally crashing and screwing him over, and the giant video files on the hard drive of, well, you understand. And then there was a spectacular pile of boxes and boxes of instant noodles behind his swivel chair, the newest flavor, which he hadn't even gotten the chance to taste even after buying it at a wholesale price. A dialogue box popped up from the system. Function download complete. Activate? 2 differently colored buttons followed. Yes, maybe next time. Shang Qinghua had a powerful urge to press the button on the left. But something stopped his hand. As it happened, he didn't really have any family on the other side. His parents had divorced early, each going their separate ways, and they had both made all new families for themselves long ago. He occasionally got together with them for a meal, but no matter which side it was, he regularly felt that his presence was extremely obtrusive. As he politely picked up food and politely gave them subservient smiles, the meals would be even more formal than they would have been if they were eating with real strangers. Even though his father was his legal guardian, when they weren't face to face, they didn't have to contact other than a few phone calls on the New Year and holidays, or when his father had asked him if he needed money. Sometimes his father would even forget to ask that, but Shang Qinghua never reminded him. No matter where he was or who he was talking to, all he did was smile that familiar, subservient smile. He was an adult, after all. His parents still had to pay his university tuition, but it was up to him to find ways for the rest of his expenses. It was when he was thinking of such ways that he happened to register for an account on Zongdian and began to write. At the beginning, it was purely to vent, and he wrote whatever and however he wanted, though the stories were unbearably shitty and he even struggled to get monetized. He did manage to get good reviews from a niche crowd. At one point, it suddenly occurred to him to change his style and see if he could rescue his subscription members, which had dipped so low the website editors had long since lost interest in asking after them. Thus arrived the instant hit, Proud Immortal Demon Way. Airplane shooting towards the sky had achieved supreme enlightenment. He had found his way. The more he wrote, the more of a shut-in he became. And the more of a shut-in he became, the more he wrote. It was a classic worthless otaku. The people with whom he had the best relationships and got along with were all on the internet, oceans and seas apart. He basically didn't have any friends like Mobei-Jun, and it would likely be very hard for him to find them again in the future. Wait, Mobei-Jun? A friend? Since when did he start seeing Mobei-Jun as a friend? Shang Qinghua scared himself with the thought, and he hurriedly grabbed another sack of Shanzhao Peak's specially produced dragon bone cantaloupe seeds and binged another half of it to push down his fright, and then he went to sleep. When Mobei-Jun dragged him off Onding Peak onto the northern border of the demon realm, blankets and all, he had just finished his melon seeds and was dreaming, mouthful of salt. He dreamed he was devouring those promised kilos of shit. There we go. He was frozen awake. Mobei-Jun tossed him onto the ground, straight into the knife-like snowy winds of the northern border. His silhouette and expression were more severe than ever. Though Mobei-Jun was quite cool, very cool, Shang Qinghua was already too frozen to have any time to spare to enjoy his coolness. His tongue started icing over as soon as he opened his mouth to grovel, so he obediently shut his lips and started to crawl upright while shivering wrapped in blankets. An icy fortress rose from the ground ahead. Mobei-Jun set off towards it without a word, and Shang Qinghua hurried to follow. The fortress doors, laid from blocks of ice, rumbled open and closed. They met not a single person all the way down at the long, deep flight of stairs until they approached a sleeping chamber, where a few guards and demon maids stood, not daring to make a sound. Shang Qinghua peeked at Mobei-Jun's face. Though he was as haughty and aloof as usual, he looked somewhat more solemn than he was typically. He couldn't resist the urge to ask, my king, how long will we be staying here? Mobei-Jun didn't move his head, but his eyes turned towards Shang Qinghua. 7 days. 7 days. Shang Qinghua was nearly knocked flat by this information. Whatever. He was very possibly right about to return home to continue shooting his airplane. He figured he might as well use these 7 days to properly bid his farewells. After all, once he returned, there would be no one to beat him up all the time or order him around like a beast of burden to wash clothes and fold blankets and serve tea and carry water. And after staying there for a while, he felt colder and colder. The Mobei clan's territory really wasn't suited for humans. Shang Qinghua jumped up and down in place to avoid being frozen alive into an ice statue. Mobei-Jun looked at him, a smile seeming to flash through his eyes. He reached out and pinched one of Shang Qinghua's fingers, quiet. It was like all the chill in his body was sucked away via this one point of contact. Shang Qinghua felt that the cold was still cold, but it was no longer intolerable. He couldn't help but feel increasingly rueful about their upcoming separation and somewhat loath to give this guy up. Come to think of it, even though Mobei-Jun had been a bit of a bad temper, was a bit bad at life skills and was a bit pampered and spoiled and liked to beat people up and a bit too much, he wasn't too bad to Shang Qinghua. Especially at this point, his benefits weren't bad and his salary wasn't bad either, and though the beatings remained a common occurrence, only Mobei-Jun was allowed to beat him up, so no one else was permitted to lay a finger on him, and in addition, recently, Mobei-Jun hadn't beaten him up very much at all. Shang Qinghua was growing concerned about his twisted standards as to what constituted a fortunate lifestyle. What would happen if he really returned home, and Mobei-Jun suddenly wanted to find someone to beat up, but Shang Qinghua was nowhere to be found? When he thought about that happenstance, he felt a pang of sorrow, like the melancholy of an actor leaving after a play was complete, all the props in place but the people long gone. Suddenly, a bone-deep chill returned to his body. Return where? Mobei-Jun said icily. Shang Qinghua realized that in his sorrow he'd actually spoken his internal dialogue out loud verbatim. Now was the real time to be sorrowful. Mobei-Jun's fingers tightened like he was about to snap Shang Qinghua's index finger in half. Now you're saying you want to leave? Shang Qinghua's face pinched in pain. Well, no, not right now. Not right now, Mobei-Jun pressed. Well, was it always? What is it you always say to me? I'll follow my king for the rest of my life. He had said this phrase countless times, but he thought no one was taking it seriously. After a stretch of silence, Mobei-Jun said, if you want to leave, leave right now. You don't need to wait 7 days. Shang Qinghua started, my king, if I really leave from this point forth, we'll never see each other again. Mobei-Jun looked at him with a gaze of someone peering at an ant from 9 million feet above it. What makes you think I would care about that? Although over the years, Shang Qinghua had trained his face to be impervious to sword or spear, these words made his expression pinch. He still wanted to explain a bit, but the situation had played out beyond his expectations. Get out. His body suddenly flew backward and he crashed against an ice wall, which was as solid as steel. The stab of pain only numbed his back for a moment before it spread through his guts. Mobei-Jun didn't even lift a hand, didn't even spare a glance in his direction. Shang Qinghua's throat rapidly filled with a gush of warm, rusty-flavored liquid. Mobei-Jun beating him up was nearly a daily occurrence, and he often told him to get out. Shang Qinghua would have been used to it, but at no other time had he been subjected to such an intense fury and loathing. Like countless times before, he crawled up from the ground, silently wiping away the blood at the side of his mouth, and gave Mobei-Jun's back a subservient smile that no one could see. After standing there for a while, he tried to speak again, but Mobei-Jun impatiently snarled, get out of here! So, Shang Qinghua hurriedly got out. Honestly speaking, though no one could have known what he was thinking in the privacy of his mind, he still felt embarrassed, specifically about the fleeting thought from before concerning Mobei-Jun and a friend. Shang Qinghua trudged up the stairs. The guards and demon maids he had seen earlier had been driven away, and they ran even faster than him, darting out of the ice fortress like a swarm of bees. The chill remained the same, but the situation as he left was completely different from how it had been at his arrival. At this time, a slanted silhouette approached, coming down the stairs. Shang Qinghua turned his head, his gaze briefly flitting across a pair of peach blossom eyes full of frosty light. Though this pair of eyes didn't land on him, they sent Shang Qinghua into a fit of shudders, his heels gluing themselves to the steps. Then, furtively, he turned around and followed. What? No! No! No, 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 no! No! No, 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 no! 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 Are you kidding me? Are you kidding? No! Oh my god! Ah! 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 That can't be it! Are you kidding me? Oh my god. Okay. You know what? When I sat down to record this chapter set this evening, I was like, man, I feel kind of sad that Scum Villain's like about to be completed, and I didn't have that sense of closure, like it was the end of the book. I was like, oh, but you know what? Now I get that from MXTX. You wouldn't get that from the Seven Seas version, because where we're at now, chapters 97, 98 are way up here. Next week is going to be about, half of it's going to be about Shang Qinghua and Mobei-Jun, and the other half's going to be the final chapter, which will be about Shin Qingqiu and Lo Binghe, of course. And the Seven Seas version, you wouldn't get that sense of closure, because chapter 93 is the interview questions, which I guess you could get a sense, but honestly, at this point, them putting the wine chapter towards the end, I mean, I guess they're trying to build up that there's been development between Lo Binghe and Shin Qingqiu, but you do get a little bit in this novel, in this chapter set, which we're going to talk about here shortly. But overall, I'm like, that's a terrible place to put that chapter set. It really is. Like, right before your end chapter, you're going to put that? Okay. But here, in the MXTX format, we have this chapter is about catching up with Shang Qinghua, which, what a chapter set. Oh my God. But it makes so much more sense now to have chapter 97, 98, and then 99 into 100. This makes, the Seven Seas version doesn't make as much sense. This, all the sense, because I got the feeling when the system was like, you did it. I didn't know there was a return home function. I didn't know that was an option. Why hasn't Shin Qingqiu received this option? Pray tell. Like, what? Why has Shin Qingqiu not received that option? I mean, I'm sure Shin Qingqiu wouldn't take it. He'd probably stay with Lo Binghe against all odds. But maybe he'll have that option next week. I don't know. I don't know what my dog is wanting, but he'll have to wait. But anyway, so probably the toy, and he's trying to get me to throw it. But anyway, so Shang Qinghua has the option to go home, but he's not going to. But he's not gonna go home. Hell no. No, he's gonna stay there with Mobei-Jun. And so I'm pretty sure next week, the ending of the chapter 98 was a little confusing. I had to go back and reread it, which we'll talk about here in the discussion. I was like, what's going on? But I get it now. So we're gonna go back. So basically, Shang Qinghua is going to stick around just long enough to see if Mobei-Jun needs help. Just long enough to see what's going on. Just long enough for these 7 days. And then he's going to make a choice of whether he goes back to what he just described at the end of this chapter set as a pretty sad life, or if he's going to stay in this world with Mobei-Jun. Gee willikers, I don't know what he's going to pick, but I want to talk about this chapter set because this chapter set was so good. I have so much fun reading in the voice of Shang Qinghua. I don't agree with everything he thinks. He's a little rat bastard. And sometimes I'm like, you're an asshole. But there are other times where I'm like, okay, all right. He's just so much fun to read. His point of view and perspective is so fun. And there's so many times that Shang Qinghua tries to pass something off as being perfectly fine when we, the audience, are reading it going, that's not right. And that's the point. It's meant to be a joke. And he's in on the joke with us. And it's hilarious. Like some of the ways he writes and MXTX writes Shang Qinghua, writing himself, it's so meta. It's so funny. I could read this whole book from his perspective. And now there's so many other things that I was like, I didn't even think about that. And then you see it from his perspective and you're like, oh my God. Like the one thing that I love, aside from the chapters of Shin Qingqiu and Lo Binghe on their sexual exploration adventure when they both just need therapy, aside from those chapters, I love that every other extra chapter has kind of been building and building upon itself, especially with the Shinju chapter, 94, has been building to get to this point. And you're like, oh, now that all makes sense. So, I want to go through this. So yeah, like for example, when Shang Qinghua says, a highly lethal pillow flew over and hit me in the face. A highly lethal pillow that Mobei-Jun threw at you? Okay. Now, granted, I could see some people being like, well, you don't like how Lo Binghe treats Shin Qingqiu, but Lo Binghe is nothing compared to Mobei-Jun. I'll give you that. Lo Binghe is, by all intents and purposes, he would never beat up Shin Qingqiu. He wouldn't do that. The blood thing is its own thing, but he would never beat him up, which I will give Lo Binghe that all day long. And Lo Binghe is devoted towards Shin Qingqiu, although maybe not because he wants to be. We'll talk about that in a second. But he doesn't beat Shin Qingqiu up. Now, granted, Mobei-Jun is a full-blown, full-on, all-blooded demon He has no ounce of humanity in him. So that kind of explains why he's like that. But I will argue through my tsundere vision and reading these chapters that Mobei-Jun, he was really hurt by Shang Qinghua saying he was going to leave. And he was really sad about that. And in his demon form, that's how he reacted and lashed out at it. But the reality is Mobei-Jun, I feel, has slowly been liking Shang Qinghua more and more, but he's a demon, so he doesn't know how to express it. The demons don't know how to express love and affection unless you're Tian Longjun and then, all over the place. But he doesn't know how to express it. And so Shang Qinghua doesn't exactly know how to interpret it, and it gets us to where we are. But anyway, Shang Qinghua does not seem to mind working for Mobei-Jun, and he manages to make his way up to being the Onding Peak Lord. The thing that got me was that the only thing he had to do as the Onding Peak Lord to get to the top of the pile was basically just trick the current Peak Lord to believing that the current Peak Lord was dismissible and that Shang Qinghua could do a better job. Shin Qingqiu is going through all these struggles, and Shang Qinghua is like, well, that's all I had to do. It's like, insane. But I like the idea that Shang Qinghua is like, wow, I never knew that if I just clung to the thighs of Mobei-Jun, things would work out the way that they did. Now, the system's like, oh, you have to become Onding Peak, the head disciple within 3 years. Not Peak Lord, but head disciple. And I was like, that seems like a very menial task compared to what Shin Qingqiu was like. Make sure, all I could think of in the moment where they were like, become Onding Peak head disciple in 3 years. Whereas Shin Qingqiu, around that same, months later in that same time period, it was like, increase Lo Binghei's popularity points by 500 in a matter of 2 hours. It's like the difference there is off the charts. But it adds to the hilarity of it. Plus, what I like as well is that Shang Qinghua knows about the same details of the Proud Immortal Demon Way as Shin Qingqiu did. He knew about their low IQ like Shin Qingqiu did. The only difference is Shin Qingqiu was like, the difference is that Shin Qingqiu was basically like, I want to make the story better. And I want to raise everyone's IQ. And that was Shang Qingqiu. And Shang Qinghua was like, I'm going to exploit this. Shang Qinghua was like, I'm going to exploit these low IQs. And Shin Qingqiu was like, I'm going to make everybody better. And I'm like, Although, we could say that poor Shin Qingqiu is being punished by having Lo Binghei skewer him, which we will talk about Shang Qinghua. I believe Shang Qinghua is going to eat those words and eat them hard. And I mean every pun with that. Because I'm just, I'm like, be careful what you say, Shang Qinghua. That can come back and bite you real quick. So we'll see if that happens in chapter 99. But anyway, so Shang Qinghua, he basically exploits the system to become the head disciple. Imagine that. And he basically talks about how the plot is just so ridiculous and stupid, but he designed it that way to gain popularity points. And the fiercest roaster he had was Peerless Cucumber. So a lot of what I feel like once Shang Qinghua figures out that the current Shin Qingqiu is Peerless Cucumber, he goes out of his way to help make sure that Shin Qingqiu suffers. It's almost like payback. It's like, oh, you left me all these roasting comments about my story. What now, bitch? So now every time that you go back, again, this does add to the readability of the series, the rereadability, because now every time I want to go back in the series and read the sections where the two of them talk, I now have knowledge that Shang Qinghua has known for quite some time that it was Shin Qingqiu. And I was like, that it was Shin Yan. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, I want to go back and reread those conversations now, knowing what he knows when he knew it, right? So, absolutely insane. So yeah, he's like, how many fucking lives of disaster karma do he has to live to draw this special prize? Ridiculous. So, what I thought was so crazy was that Shin Qingqiu, the old Shin Qingqiu, and Liu Qingge end up being in a situation together on a mission, and Shang Qinghua has to follow them. And we talked about this way back in the previous episodes and chapters where where Shin Yan as Shin Qingqiu saved Liu Qingge, and how Liu Qingge was really thrown off by that and being like, what the hell? Well, now we all see it come full circle. The crazy thing about it is that you have with Shinju, I'm going to put Shinju Shin Qingqiu. The crazy thing with him is that you had Yu Qingyan, who liked him, and then you have Shinju's Shin Qingqiu with Liu Qingge, which honestly, I got the impression that Shin Qingqiu might have had feelings towards Liu Qingge, but was too tsundere and too proud and arrogant to admit them. And then Yu Qingyan likes Shinju the way that he is, but can't say anything because of this unspoken tension. And then all of that kind of gets completely shoved into the blender when Shin Yan becomes Shin Qingqiu, because Shin Qingqiu is no longer the one that Yu Qingyan knows, and now Liu Qingge is like, well, I don't know what to do with this. And then you have Lo Binghe in the mix that is getting, wrapped up in that as well. So it's just really tragic. In a lot of ways, it's really tragic and sad. And Shang Qinghua is the one who kind of says, well, what if Liu Qingge and Shin Qingqiu start flirting? And then it's like, actually, what about this new Shin Yan taking over Shin Qingqiu? What if him and Lo Binghe start flirting? So it's just absolutely insane. It's so crazy. And oh my God, every time Yu Qingyan spoke during this chapter set, I was like, my heart was breaking. I was like, oh no. Because now MXTX is really good at being strategic with placing her little exposition bombs where she's like, badoo, 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 here's your payoff, here's your payoff, here's your payoff. Because chapter 94 was not that long ago, and we saw the whole thing go down with Yu Qingyan and Shinju, and now, like 4 chapters later, you see it impacted even further. And the whole stuff with Liu Qingge hanging out up here with Shin Qingqiu, now we see like him being like weirded out and like, what do I do with all this? Like the payoff in these chapters is so good. And I'm like, MXTX, genius. I give her crap about the whole Yu Mingyan thing, but with the Liu Mingyan thing, but the rest of this, I'm like, this is pretty amazing stuff. My thing was, whenever Shang Qinghua talks about the chi deviation, being like, don't cultivate by yourself, it's easy to fall in chi deviation. I feel like Shang Qinghua, in their own way, when they said that to Liu Qingge, was trying to protect Liu Qingge from dying. But I also feel like Shang Qinghua was like, it felt like one of those moments where if you don't say something now, you're going to regret it later. So Shang Qinghua knows that Liu Qingge is going to be killed during a chi deviation by Shin Qingqiu. So at this point, with that being the case, you have Shang Qinghua trying to say something like, hey, I know this is going to happen. Like, on the off chance that you're stuck in a cave with somebody having a chi deviation, don't kill him, okay? And I'm sure Shang Qinghua was like, well, it's not going to matter. It's going to happen in the story, but at least I tried. To try to give himself a pat on the back and make him feel better. What he didn't expect was that Liu Qingge would actually live and that it would work. But the thing is, it didn't work because it wasn't his words that stopped Shin Qingqiu from killing Liu Qingge. It was literally Shin Yan transmigrating into him. And I love when they're having the meeting, and we'll talk about the meeting in a second, but when they're having the meeting and Shang Qinghua's like, oh wait, you're supposed to be dead. Like, just, it's crazy, right? But once Shang Qinghua becomes Peak Lord, he didn't have to bow and scrape to anyone. So we cut past some time. Like, I thought reading that we were at the point where he had become head disciple, but we've moved way on past that to the point where he becomes Peak Lord. And that's when they have a meeting. The meeting was just so wild because the whole time that we have had Shin Qingqiu at the beginning in volume 1 walking around being like, nobody suspects that I'm different. I'm acting totally in character. No, everybody knew. Everybody knew he was acting out of character, and they're like, this is weird. This is bizarre. Does anybody else think this is weird? And everybody's like, it's an improvement. Let's just go with it. Again, the rereadability, going back through and seeing that and going, oh my God. I was floored. Because now, when you go back, all those moments with Yu Qingyan have a different feel to them. Like all of these extra chapters that have set up the Shinju backstory, mainly chapter 94, but the stuff with Liu Qingge and Yu Qingyan and their experiences with Shinju as Shin Qingqiu, they all set it up where, and Shin Qingqiu, the OG version, I love how MXTX writes them because they're so icy and so... Shin Yan's Shin Qingqiu in comparison is like a freaking ray of sunshine and daisies. Like, it is so hilarious because when you're reading volume 1 and volume 2, but particularly volume 1, when you're reading those and seeing Shin Yan posing as Shin Qingqiu and trying to be him, you think, oh, he's doing a pretty good job. You wouldn't know that it's not him. And then you go back to this volume and you read those extras and you see just how different Shinju's Shin Qingqiu was, that now in hindsight, looking back, you're like, oh no, Shin Qingqiu is definitely noticeably different. And you just didn't think that in volume 1. So it's so crazy. But they're all like, well, it's an improvement, so let's just go with it. I love how their excuse is that they think that Shin Qingqiu had a chi deviation and has amnesia. Like, that's what they think it is. They're like, well, he has amnesia, so he's in a much better mood than before. Let's just roll with it. But I love that I don't love, but it's very bittersweet that Yu Qingyan is the only one that's kind of like, well, I wish he was like he was. I can see why you all read the fan fiction now. I could see, like, honestly, the fan art that's been in the Discord shared, Pancake and some others have shared this fan art. It really has turned me on to the idea of the Shinju and Yu Qingyan alternate universe. And I'm kind of obsessed with it and I'm kind of in love with it. I need this healing fiction. I was honestly, I know a few chapters back, like when we started, I was kind of against, I didn't like the idea that the fandom was relying on fan fiction because to me, it made me think less of the original work. Like, if the original work is in a way written to where the fandom wants to go to the fanfic to like have it instead, I feel like that's kind of, I felt at first before really diving into this volume like it was discrediting to MXTX, but now I get that it's not necessarily discrediting to MXTX, but it's more along the lines of these are unfinished stories, but the threads that MXTX brings up, the fandom has just expanded in different ways. Now, granted, there's probably fix that take care of Lo Binghe and Shin Qingqiu's relationship, but I think that overall, it's just taking these concepts that are introduced here and expanding on them, which I'm absolutely all for now. I'm a tourist. You got to warm me up to all this, right? Right. So, threw that against the wall and it did not go good. But anyway, so they all decide to just go through it. But I love the idea that Shang Qinghua is like, well, what is going on? Like, he's like, why is Shin Qingqiu at Baisan Peak? He's an important scum villain. If he's beaten to death, then who's going to torment Binghe? The idea of tormenting Binghe, now granted, this was Shang Qinghua thinking of how Lo Binghe was in the original novel and being like, well, who's going to be the person that torments Binghe if he's killed at Baisan Peak? But he didn't know until this moment that Shin Yan had taken over Shin Qingqiu. My mind is just blown that Shang Qinghua and Shin Qingqiu have had conversations and meetings before the Immortal Alliance conference. My mind is blown because originally in volume 1 with Shin Qingqiu, because Shin Qingqiu is not the most reliable narrator, as we've come to find out, that I was led to believe that Shin Qingqiu always knew about Shang Qinghua, knew about his betrayal, knew about Mobei-Jun killing him, but that he hadn't been in contact with him until the Immortal Alliance conference when he met up with him and was like, oh, there he is. And then afterwards they meet, which I guess in hindsight felt kind of weird because you would think, why would they be so chummy if they hadn't already met before? But I can't remember if they had met before in the novel or not. But now it just is mind-blowing to me that they've met so often. And Shang Qinghua has been like, why is Lo Binghe like this? What is going on? This isn't like the original novel. What is this? And just when you see, this was honestly the thing for me, right? Because we've followed Shin Qingqiu and his journey and seeing how he interacts with Lo Binghe for 3.5 volumes. And so we've been inside Shin Qingqiu's head or Shin Yan's head, and seen his internal monologue. And he's griping and he's being, witty and all this and being like, I don't know, Lo Bing-hei, I just don't know this little white lotus blossom, but and said whatever he said. But in this chapter set, seeing it from an outside perspective and watching Shang Qinghua watch them, it's this. Like, Shin Qingqiu was so kind and so nice, and it's so noticeable that everybody else is kind of like, it's one of those things where the main character doesn't realize the influence that they have on others. And when we're following it from their perspective, they just brush it off like, oh, it's nothing. I'm not influencing them in any way. But then you watch all of the characters from the outside perspective and how they react to him, and you see that, like, no, you are affecting them. And you don't even know that you're affecting them. Like when Shang Qinghua describes how at Shang Peak, how Ning Yingying and all them used to be very gloomy and just kind of like went and did their thing and were just like dismal. And now they're all like, he said a bunch of ADHD children. And I was like, oh my God. But the way he describes that shift from them being the way that they were to being how they are now, you really get to see the impact that Shen-Yan as Shin Qingqiu has had on their lives. And it's so cool to see it from an outside perspective. And it adds so much to that first volume, seeing it here. Also, what the hell was the two bloody hairy balls? Is that supposed to be a sexual reference? What were they? I was so confused. I was like, why? But why did you give these hairy balls to Shin Qingqiu? I'm just so weirded out. But yeah, Lo Bing-hei being like, hey, and Shang Qinghua being like, you are being insanely out of character. What the hell? A soft little lump that called out Shizun. Shang Qinghua being so thrown off at that point, and then being like, you made Bingay into a kitchen girl. Only the female protagonists are allowed to eat the male protagonist's cooking. Well, can't you stay in your place? Forget it. I love that Shang Qinghua was like, what are you doing? And then the rest is history, right? But yeah, it's so crazy seeing Shin Qingqiu from this other perspective. I absolutely loved it. It was so good, and it just made this chapter stand out even more. Of course, what's interesting is that we find out that Bai-Zhan Peak, who has the way that also Shang Qinghua describes Bai-Zhan Peak is also interesting, that they're just basically a bunch of thugs. And Liu Qingge is like the leader of the thugs, because Shin Qingqiu doesn't exactly describe it the same way. But whenever they're like, oh, well, Lo Bing-hei's getting bullied by them, and Shin Qingqiu's like, oh, don't worry, it'll be fine, it'll be taken care of. And then Shang Qinghua's like, wait, him going and getting all the disciples beaten up by practicing with Liu Qingge, that was him getting revenge for Lo Bing-hei, wasn't it? And it could have been. It could have been. We don't know for sure, but it could have very well been. And that would make sense, because whenever Shin Qingqiu went over to Liu Qingge's to train, I was like, sparring with Liu Qingge on Lo Bing-hei's watch? But this was before the Abyss, where Lo Bing-hei wasn't instantly jealous and darkened. So I was like, huh. Or maybe Lo Bing-hei was jealous and dark and on the inside, but just wasn't showing it in front of his Shizun. But yeah, it all makes sense now that, yeah, why else would Shin Qingqiu go there except to train? But then I was like, I was waiting for Shang Qinghua to wonder why Shin Qingqiu was training there if he didn't need to, if he already had the skills. But unless Shen Yan was like, I don't know what to do with this body, so I need to train and learn. But Liu Qingge was also helping him without a cure, with the whole mediations from that. And it could very well be that Shin Qingqiu was trying to get back at those bullies by making them suffer without, technically making them suffer on his watch. Good on him. So yeah, it's just, I love that Shang Qinghua is in such a state of shock. It says that he, like, what does he say there? After Great Master Airplane had finished swearing, he had a rare moment of careful thought. And he said he'd never quite used classical idioms properly, and he'd hauled out his limited supply to describe that. So what's interesting is he questions the use of idioms, and then, oh, okay. So he said they're treating each other as honored guests, which means mutual respect between spouses. Oh, okay. Okay. I love when he says if the day came where Shin Qingqiu and Lo Binghe flirted, he'd eat 3 kilos of shit. And then later on, he comes back to it and he's like, he's imagining himself eating 3 kilos of shit. And I was like, yes, I'm glad that came full circle. So, but I thought for a moment, what I thought was going to happen was that Airplane was going to use an idiom to test the waters and see if Shin Qingqiu had been replaced by somebody else from the real world, if there had been a transmigration, because he's onto the fact that this is all very weird and not in character. So I thought he was going to do that, but then it says at that moment, Great Master Airplane shooting towards the sky had assiduously struggling to recover from this episode, had not yet realized the Scum Villain had already been replaced by that unmatched hater, Peerless Cucumber. So he hadn't realized at the moment that it was Shin Yan. But I thought he was going to test it, and that's not what ends up happening. But then he says to think in those days of yore, when his rants had grown excessively ferocious, Airplane had sometimes casually cursed him, maliciously praying that no matter how peerless his cucumber was, he would never get a chance to use it again. And it looks like his curse was fulfilled. Funny how that karma works, right? So then we get to chapter 98. And we get to where we jump forward in time, post the abyss, where Lo Binghe is in the demon caves and he's in a bad mood, and Shang Qinghua is like, he thinks that Lo Binghe's in a bad mood because, you know, he should be able to just have sex with anybody, and he says he's got all these pent up frustrations now that Shin Qingqiu is imprisoned and he's not doing anything. And he's like, well, I'm the original author. So he's like, if he could still control the current, this part is the part that made me go, really? He says if he could control the current Binghe with his pen, guided by the principle of satisfying the protagonist as being satisfying to the readers, he would have let Lo Binghe defile Shin Qingqiu hundreds of times, like skewering a kebab. And then he says this definitely had nothing to do with his personal grievances against Peerless Cucumber. Definitely not. That part blew my mind because I was like, Shin Qingqiu, despite calling you a bastard, and despite, you know, saying like, how dare you, author, Shin Qingqiu's anger at Shang Qinghua was often because of how bad the writing was and how bad the tropes were. Like he was just mad at Shang Qinghua for his writing, not him as a person on a personal level. But here when you flip it, Shang Qinghua seems to be saying like, yeah, if it were me, I would punish Shin Qingqiu by letting Lo Binghe skewer him over and over again. No props, position, or location would ever be repeated, and things would get easier once it was skewered, mind you, and feelings would develop during the skewering. And I was like, excuse me? So it felt like if Shang Qinghua could have had his way, then he would have just had Lo Binghe fuck Shin Qingqiu until he liked him. And I'm like, that is like a toxic trope in some BL that I loathe and that I hate. And I'm like, how dare you, Shang Qinghua, to think that? Now, does Shang Qinghua still think that by the end? I don't know. I mean, Shang Qinghua, though, has developed feelings towards Mobei-Jun because Mobei-Jun hit him, and it's a weird, messed up relationship. I mean, I don't think he's developed feelings just because Mobei-Jun's hit him. I'm not able to phrase what I want to say properly. But he's like been hit by Mobei-Jun and kind of like, I don't want to say Stockholm syndromed into it, but I have a lot of problems with that last paragraph before chapter 98. And I'm kind of like, Shang Qinghua, what are you saying? Why are you being that way? So I don't know. It feels like Shang Qinghua is still kind of relying upon looking to his writing through the lens of something really toxic. And I don't know how to feel about that. But I mean, I guess the funny thing is Shang Qinghua's not going to leave. He's not going to go back home. He's going to stay there with Mobei-Jun. I don't know. I feel like I felt kind of personally, I don't want to say insulted, but I felt like, you know, clutched my pearls a little bit at the idea of, oh, if it were you, you'd have Lo Binghe screw Shin Qingqiu until he liked him. Like, that's such a toxic and very scary, like, mind break trope. That's getting some dangerous territory there, and I don't know how to feel about that. Comment down below! But anyway, in chapter 98, we get our picture from this chapter set of Airplane's Fortuitous Encounter. And it's of Lo Binghe asking each of them for guidance on what to do. Xia Hualing, who I'm glad to see her, glad she's in this, Mobei-Jun, and Shang Qinghua, who's like, what the fudge? So Lo Binghe asks, if you hold unique feelings for a person, how do you make them understand your intentions? And Shang Qinghua is like, what's interesting is that Lo Binghe seems to be like the original, where he is darkened and kind of like, you know, a demon lord. But then I'm like, are a lot of his tendencies to be a whiny puppy because Shang Qinghua told him that was a good idea? What? I was like, wait a minute, hold on. Because he's asking them for advice. Now, Shang Qinghua recognizes that most of these demons, whenever they're asked about romance, their IQ just plummets, which is funny to think about with Tianlong Jun and Zhu Long. But he's like, they're not humans, so they couldn't answer like humans. And so Mobei-Jun is like, well, do you just beat them up 3 times a day? Which means, when he says, how do you, if you hold unique feelings, how do you make them understand? Mobei-Jun said beat them up. What has he been doing to Shang Qinghua this entire time? Beat him up. So it's like, Shang Qinghua, you should realize from that answer that Mobei-Jun likes you. What the fudge? So then, Lo Binghe is like, no, that's not going to work. And so then Xia Hualing, who I love, is just like, I like you. Why are you making me answer this? I don't have a chance with you, do I? She's asked about it. And she's like, well, just ask Meng Mo. And Lo Binghe is like, I already did. Now, Shang Qinghua says that Meng Mo would likely have given the same answer as Shang Qinghua, which was to just do them first. Which I'm like, Shang Qinghua, that is not a very nice answer. But Shang Qinghua is kind of a rat bastard, so why are we surprised? But Xia Hualing is like, well, you know, I don't know what to say. Ask Shang Qinghua. And so she's like, Mobei-Jun brings him every day to this assembly hall. What's the meaning of this? And Lo Binghe is like, well, he's just here. And she's like, oh my God, I can't. What's interesting is that Shang Qinghua, he like gets noticed by Lo Binghe, and he's like, my son noticed me. He noticed me. And I'm like, well, Lo Binghe doesn't really refer to Tianlong Jun as his dad. So, but it's also weird for Shang Qinghua to refer to Lo Binghe as his son. It's so bizarre. But he's like, well, since you asked, you know, I'll go ahead and tell you, be clingy. A fierce woman fears a clingy man. A brave hero fears a pampered lady. As long as your skills are up to par, you can grind an iron bar into a needle. Even if he's as straight as an embroidery needle, you can bend him into a paper clip. So basically what Shang Qinghua is saying is if you just whittle him down, if you just cling to him excessively, then over time he'll eventually give in like Stockholm Syndrome and he'll let you in. How romantic. Now the thing about it is that Shin Qingqiu already kind of liked the OG Lo Binghe from the start. Shin Yan did. So he, and I would argue that Shin Qingqiu from the beginning of this novel already kind of liked Lo Binghe anyway in the White Lotus version. So I would say that while Shang Qinghua doesn't believe that Shin Qingqiu liked Lo Binghe at all, and he's like, well, just be clingy and Stockholm Syndrome into it, I would argue that Shin Qingqiu did like Lo Binghe to an extent already, which we kind of got the hint from because of his hesitation with the Abyss. So there wasn't a lot of clinging that Lo Binghe had to do to make this work, but still the idea that Shang Qinghua gave him that advice and just went on a 20-minute ramble about what to do. And he's like, you know, it's quite simple. No man doesn't wish for a weak, lovable, docile partner. And he's like, if you're lovable and docile, you can evoke his tenderest affections and make him a partner. So a partner must be obedient and do all this. That makes me sense that Lo Binghe is actually this demonic demon lord all along, and the whole puppy dog thing is just to appeal to Shin Qingqiu. Which I don't know how to feel about, because on the one hand, that makes more sense with Lo Binghe being kind of like feigning being this immature kid. But on the other hand, I'm like, be yourself. I'm like, communicate and be yourself. Don't pretend to be a clingy bitch if that's not really you. Because Shin Qingqiu liked the original Lo Binghe, who was a badass, not the clingy puppy dog. The clingy puppy dog, he just feels kind of obligated to like, where he's like, I guess I have to because, but unlike Lo Binghe, just be yourself, and Shin Qingqiu will probably like you, and talk it out with him. But these demons are all terrible at love advice. My only hope is that in chapter 100, maybe Lo Binghe lets down the guard and is like, look, this is how I actually am. I've just been following the advice of this moron. Did it work? And Shin Qingqiu's like, just be yourself. Why aren't you doing that from the start? We'll see. We'll see what chapter 100 gives us. But Shang Qinghua describes Shin Qingqiu as a straight man, and I'm like, I don't know. That, again, I feel like it's kind of unreliable narrator meets unreliable narrator, because Shin Qingqiu did not appear straight to me from the start of the story. From the start of the story, he was giving off a lot of red flags that he at least was not entirely into women. And Shang Qinghua has given off red flags that he's not entirely into women either, but he's not addressing those. So it's like, anyway. Shang Qinghua's like, well, in theory, it would be correct that if you want to be liked by a man, the best method is to act pathetic. And, well, Mobei-Jun asks that, because Mobei-Jun's like, wait a minute. I said that my love language to you is that I've beaten you up, and me beating you up means that I like you. And are you saying that you acting pathetic means that you like me? And Shang Qinghua's like, sure, that's what the theory is. And then Mobei-Jun just gives him the head pat and walks away. Meaning that Mobei-Jun likes Shang Qinghua, and Shang Qinghua's an idiot and doesn't realize it. But maybe he will in chapter 99. So, in the end, we have the Maigu Ridge thing. The one thing that I do regret that wasn't explored in this chapter set, I really wanted to see the moment that Shang Qinghua figured out that Shin Qingqiu was who he said he was, which I guess we got that happening in volume 2, but I really had wanted to happen and see it from Shang Qinghua's perspective, but it's fine. So we do get the idea of Mobei-Jun getting rescued by Shang Qinghua, and Mobei-Jun being like kind of surprised, like, you saved me. Oh, so he's nicer around Shang Qinghua because Shang Qinghua saved him. Like, they've come a long way in the last few chapters, and then we get the realization that there's an option to return home. Shin Qingqiu hasn't gotten this option that I know of, but maybe he did and turned it down. Who knows? I don't know, though. I mean, I really would be curious to see if Shin Qingqiu got that same option that Shang Qinghua does. Or does Shang Qinghua only get the option because he's the author, and Shin Qingqiu doesn't get the option because he's not the author? That could be. So they're like, the basic completion of the original outline is achieved. Slight deviation in the romantic plotline. I like that slight deviation was Lo Binghe falling in love with Shin Qingqiu instead of the harem of 300 women. Love that that's a slight deviation. Love that. So they're like, yeah, you can return to the original world. Maybe this is a function in other isekai. This is my first isekai, so I don't know. But yeah, and Shang Qinghua is so excited. Now, here's the thing. He starts to imagine going back. And at first he thinks, oh, well, I can be a writer again. I can have my story again. But then, you know, like the further he thinks about it, he's like, I can go back to all the trolls. I can go back to the laptop that I've used that keeps crashing and screwing me over. There's all the instant ramen that I've been missing. And it feels very sarcastic at that point. Like he's like, actually going back sounds like a terrible idea. But then there's the download option of yes, or maybe next time. The maybe next time leads me to believe that the option's going to stay out there and it will reactivate every now and then. Like if he lives out an entire lifetime in this world and is on his deathbed, the system will pop up and be like, do you want to go back home now? And he could press go back home and then go back to the time frame before. And he's lived out this entire lifetime in the story, but goes back to his 20-something-year-old self when he gets out of the story again. Maybe. Who knows? I don't think he's going to go back. The moment he started talking about his family and how they're divorced and he has kind of a shitty home life and he doesn't really have any money and that's why he started writing to begin with. The moment he started talking about that, I was like, you're not going to go home. You're going to stay in this world. And you're going to stay with Mobei-Jun. Because then, of course, that leads to the next aspect he talks about, which is is Mobei-Jun a friend or is he more than that? And he's like, well, Mobei-Jun does beat me up sometimes, but that's kind of his love language, so I don't know. So anyway, they go back, they talk about going into this ice fortress, and I'll be honest, when they said how long they're going to stay in the ice fortress, and he said 7 days, I thought that Mobei-Jun was leading him down to like have sex with him. I thought that's where it was going, and Shang Qinghua was going to have to make a decision of leave now or have sex with Mobei-Jun and admit his sexuality. I thought that's where we were headed, but it does not seem to be the case. Instead, it seems like they're down there for a week for another reason. But he goes down there, and I like how Shang Qinghua is cold, and then Mobei-Jun's like, stop it, but he makes him feel less cold by touching him, which was a nice gesture on Mobei-Jun's part. Mobei-Jun is definitely the kind that does actions, and we, the audience, can see him thinking things, but it's not apparent or as obvious, maybe. But then Shang Qinghua thinks out loud, and he's like, you know, what would happen if he finally returned home and Mobei-Jun suddenly wanted to find somebody to beat up and didn't have Shang Qinghua? And that's when he realizes that he does the ultimate taboo of a rom-com. He says what he's thinking out loud. And if I was Mobei-Jun, I would feel a bit upset because you developed these feelings towards Shang Qinghua. Shang Qinghua said he'd follow you for the rest of his life. You've developed these feelings for him. You're a demon, so you don't fully understand human emotions, but you found this attachment to Shang Qinghua and suddenly realized that it could all have been a lie. I'd feel pretty betrayed by that too. And so the thing about it is, unlike Lo Binghe, who clings to Shin Ching-cho and is like, what do you, like on the edge of the abyss where he's clinging to him above the fires and all the heat, and he's like, oh no, don't leave me. Unlike that, Mobei-Jun does the exact opposite, and he's like, no, you get out. If you don't want to be here, get out. If you want to leave, then leave right now. You don't need to wait 7 days. Which is such a stark contrast. And then Shang Qinghua is like, if I leave, we'll never see each other again. And Mobei-Jun's like, well, what difference does it make? You said you were going to go, so it doesn't matter if I see you again or not. It wasn't going to happen anyway. And then he tells him to get out. Which hurts a lot because, you know, Shang Qinghua is like, well, what do I do now? And so he thinks, he's like, well, fine. That's all the proof I needed. I'm just going to leave. We're not going to worry about being friends. Everything will be fine. So at first when I was reading it, this part was a little confusing to me. I was like, what is happening? But apparently he goes up the stairs. The guards and the demon maids from earlier had all left. And says the chill remained, but the situation he left was completely different than how it was on his arrival. Then it says, at this time, a slanted silhouette approached coming down the stairs. And it feels like Shang Qinghua like gets over to the side of the wall and sees the person past him. They pass him and they have frosty eyes. So maybe they're like Mobei-Jun. It said peach blossom eyes filled with frosty light. Well, Mobei-Jun's eyes glow. So maybe this person's eyes glowing means that they're related or they're connected to the Mobei clan. And he says, though the eyes didn't land on him, they sent Shang Qinghua into a fit of shudders, his heels gluing themselves to the steps. And then he turned around and followed. So he was getting ready to walk out, presumably to accept the system's request to go back home. But then he saw this person that looks maybe like they're related to Mobei-Jun and decided to turn back around and see what was up. Oh my God. Oh my God, y'all. It's going to be really hard to not go ahead and dive into chapter 99 and 100. It's going to be really hard. But next week is the last week of Scum Villain for now. I've got the last 2 chapters to read. I've got all the goodies to unpack from this that I've been carefully keeping secret. I've got an interview to read. I'm going to ask if there's anything else I need to look at, or if there is anything else, maybe I'll wait and you all can tell me after that. But it's wild. And then after that, we will be starting a new series. After, like, it'll be part 37 of the novel. And I would have done 10 episodes. So it's been almost a year with Scum Villain. Isn't that wild? Almost a year with it? So crazy. I'm floored. Huh. I don't know how to feel. This chapter set definitely felt more conclusive, like we're building to a climax. And next chapter set, chapter 99 will be the climax of Mobei-Jun and Shang Qinghua's relationship. I think Shang Qinghua will decide to stay with Mobei-Jun in that world. And then chapter 100 will be Shin Qingqiu and Lo Binghei's conclusion, which feels like it's coming out of nowhere because we haven't seen them in, we haven't touched base with, we have not touched base with Shin Qingqiu. I mean, we saw them chapter 93, so I guess it's been 3 weeks. But it's been over a month since we've really had a chapter entirely devoted to them other than the Q&A. So yeah. Wild. I'm going to be very curious to see what that's like next week, but it feels so strange to say that. It feels what's so interesting about this series is that while it feels slightly anticlimactic, it doesn't. It feels like we're building towards the final chapters. And I think because this series has so many what ifs and offshoots, and there's there's parallel universes and multiverse involved, that it feels like the stories are endless. I feel like I'm reading a Doctor Who story. Like, even though the story is ending, there's all these possibilities in the fandom that kind of, it keeps me from being sad about it in a weird way. So we'll just wait and see about that one. So anyway, on that note, I hope you all enjoyed this chapter's discussion and reading. I'm so curious to know your thoughts down below. Oh my God, especially about some of the parts I was like, I don't know how to feel about this, but I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back next week with the final chapter set of Scum Villain's self-saving system. Bye.